Hello there, and welcome back to the Patronus pages. Today we will be doing a full summary and review of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. I hope this will be helpful for folks who are maybe wanting to get back into the series, but just need a quick recap. As our story begins, Harry Potter is spending another miserable summer at 4 Privet Drive. It is just past midnight, and, because the Dursleys have locked away his school things, he is forced to lie under his blankets with a flashlight, a history of magic, parchment, quill and ink hidden in a pillowcase, finishing an essay on the futility of witch burning in the 14th century. Every few lines he pauses to be sure no one hears the scratch of his quill. If Uncle Vernon catches him, Harry knows he'll be banished to the cupboard under the stairs again. Life with the Dursleys is worse than ever. Vernon, Petunia and their spoiled son Dudley still loathe all mention of magic and pretend Harry's parents died in an ordinary car crash, not at Voldemort's hands. They cling to the hope that constant repression will stamp the wizardry out of him. This summer they have confiscated his wand, spellbooks and Nimbus 2000 and strictly forbid him to talk to neighbours. The only small concession is that Hedwig may fly free at night. Her enraged hoots were wrecking their sleep when she was caged. Harry is equally determined to keep up with his heavy holiday workload. Snape's tricky essay on shrinking solutions looms largest. So during an outing when the Dursleys bragged about Uncle Vernon's new company car, Harry secretly picked the lock of the cupboard and rescued a handful of books. If he keeps the ink off the sheets, his relatives need never know he is studying magic after hours. The Dursleys' temper is already frayed because of a disastrous phone call a week into the holidays. Ron Weasley, unfamiliar with Muggle telephones, had bellowed Harry's name at the top of his lungs when Uncle Vernon answered. Vernon, convinced some dangerous lunatic was on the line, shrieked back, slammed the receiver and unleashed one of his worst tirades yet, furious that Harry had people like that contacting the house. Ron apparently realised the damage and hasn't called since. Hermione Granger, being Muggle-born and telephone-savvy, hasn't rung either, evidently warned off. Thus Harry has heard nothing from Hogwarts friends for 5 long weeks, making this summer nearly as grim as the last. At 1 o'clock, Harry suddenly notices the date. He has been 13 for an hour without remembering. Birthdays have never meant cards or cakes. His last 2 passed unmentioned, and he expects no difference now. He crosses to his open window. The night air is cool, Dudley's snores grind distantly, and Hedwig has been away 2 nights on a hunting flight. She is the only creature in the house that greets him without contempt. Harry has grown a little taller, but remains slight. His hair sticks up as irrepressibly as ever, and the lightning bolt scar still gleams on his forehead, a permanent reminder that Voldemort murdered Lily and James Potter and failed to kill their infant son. As Harry muses that he is lucky to have reached another birthday at all, movement in the sky catches his eye. Against the full moon, a large, lopsided shape approaches, flapping hard. It resolves into 3 owls, 2 supporting a third unconscious bird, and they barrel through the window onto Harry's bed. The limp owl is Errol, the decrepit Weasley family bird. Harry unties a bulky package from Errol's legs, gives him water in Hedwig's cage, and turns to greet his own snowy white owl. Hedwig proudly presents a second parcel before joining Errol on the perch. The third owl, a handsome, tawny creature bearing the Hogwarts crest, drops a letter and sweeps back into the night. Harry lunges first at Errol's parcel and, for the first time in his life, unwraps a birthday card. Inside are a moving Daily Prophet clipping and a letter from Ron. The clipping announces that Arthur Weasley has won the Prophet's Grand Prize galleon draw, 700 galleons, and has whisked the entire family to Egypt to visit eldest son Bill, a Gringotts cursebreaker. In the photograph, all 9 red-haired Weasleys beam and wave in front of a pyramid. Ron stands tallest, gangly, with rat Scabbers on his shoulder and arm around little sister Ginny. Ron's letter apologizes for the telephone fiasco, describes thrilling tours of booby-trapped tombs, and promises a shopping trip to London a week before term so he can buy a new wand. He adds a postscript: their pompous brother Percy has been made head boy. Ron's gift is a tiny glass spinning top, a pocket sneakerscope, meant to glow and whirl when untrustworthy people are nearby, though Bill claims tourist models are unreliable. Next, Harry opens Hedwig's delivery, a heavy parcel and letter from Hermione, who is vacationing in France. She hopes the Dursleys aren't tormenting him and explains her trouble smuggling a wizarding present through Muggle customs. Luckily, Hedwig appeared to help. Hermione is immersing herself in local magical history and has already expanded her History of Magic essay to twice Professor Binns's requirement. She, too, mentions meeting in London with Ron before school. Her gift makes Harry's heart leap. A sleek black leather broomstick servicing kit containing Fleetwood's handle polish, silver tail-twig clippers, a brass broom compass, and a handbook on DIY care. Perfect for a Quidditch-mad seeker with a Nimbus 2000. Finally, Harry tears the brown paper off Hagrid's untidy parcel. Something green and leathery twitches inside and snaps. Startled, Harry grabs his bedside lamp as a weapon, rips the remaining paper, and reveals the Monster Book of Monsters, an aggressive, fanged textbook. It scuttles like a crab, bites his hand, and thumps around the room until he wrestles it flat and straps it shut with a belt. Hagrid's card only says that Harry might find this useful next year, which Harry finds ominous but amusing. With gifts and 3 birthday cards set proudly on his nightstand, Harry at last opens the thicker-than-usual Hogwarts envelope delivered by the Tawny Owl. Professor McGonagall's notice confirms that term begins September 1st and that third years may visit Hogsmeade Village on designated weekends, provided their parent or guardian signs the enclosed permission slip. Harry's pleasure dims. The Dursleys will never consent. The envelope also contains the new book list. It is now 2 a.m. Harry decides to worry about the permission form later. He crosses off another square on the hand-drawn calendar, counting down to Hogwarts, removes his glasses, and lies back in bed. Gazing at the trio of birthday cards, proof that somewhere people care about him, Harry feels, for once, simply happy that today is his birthday. Harry's 13th birthday dawns like any other day at 4 Privet Drive. The Dursleys ignore him at breakfast while admiring Dudley's latest indulgence, a brand-new kitchen television that saves the overfed boy the long walk to the living room set. A news bulletin flashes an alert about a gaunt, long-haired convict named Sirius Black who has escaped and is considered armed and dangerous. Uncle Vernon, outraged that the report omits the name of Black's prison, grumbles that hanging is the only cure for people like that, throwing Harry a pointed look about his hair. The morning turns worse when Uncle Vernon mentions collecting his sister, Aunt Marge, from the station for a week-long visit. Marge, a bulldog breeder with Vernon's girth and temperament, delights in humiliating Harry. Before leaving, Vernon lays down 3 rules. 1. Harry must be unfailingly polite to Marge. 2. He must perform no funny stuff, because Marge knows nothing about magic. And 3. He must help sustain the lie that he attends St. Brutus's secure centre for incurably criminal boys. Sensing leverage, Harry asks Vernon to sign his Hogsmeade permission form in return for flawless cooperation. Vernon grudgingly agrees to consider it if Harry behaves perfectly all week. Resigned, Harry hides his birthday presents and homework beneath the loose floorboard and sends Hedwig, and the now-revived Errol, back to Ron with a note explaining he can't use Owlpost during Marge's stay. Then he steels himself to greet the guest. Aunt Marge arrives, suitcase in one hand and savage bulldog Ripper tucked under the other. She showers Dudley with kisses and a crisp £20 note, treats Harry like furniture, and settles in for tea. Over the next several days, she keeps Harry under constant scrutiny, booming comparisons between perfectly bred Dudley and defective Harry, and buying Dudley lavish gifts while daring Harry to complain. Harry copes by mentally reciting passages from his new handbook of do-it-yourself broom care. Even so, Marge's taunts test his control. At lunch on day 3, she insists poor breeding always tells, comparing Harry to a bad pup. Her wineglass shatters in her hand, and the Dursleys eye Harry suspiciously. He remembers the Ministry's prior warning against underage magic. Another incident could mean expulsion from Hogwarts, so he flees the table to calm down. At last, the final evening comes. The Dursleys serve an elaborate dinner and ply Marge with wine and then brandy. Emboldened, she launches her cruelest tirade yet, calling Harry's late mother a bad egg, who married a lazy scrounger. When Vernon labels James Potter unemployed, Harry snaps that it isn't true, but forces himself to sit. Marge seizes the brandy bottle, demands details, and sneers that Harry's parents died in a drunken car crash. Harry erupts. They didn't die in a car crash, and the magic he's been bottling up explodes outward. Aunt Marge literally inflates, her face balloons, buttons shoot across the room, and she rises from her chair like an oversized lifebuoy, hands and feet protruding. Vernon grabs her ankle and is dragged upward. Ripper sinks his teeth into Vernon's leg, adding chaos. Seizing the moment, Harry bolts. Fueled by rage and panic, he magically blasts open the cupboard, hauls out his school trunk, races upstairs for his hidden pillowcase of presents and books, scoops up Hedwig's empty cage, and drags everything to the front door. Vernon, leg bleeding, roars for Harry to put her right, but Harry brandishes his wand, warning him to stay back. She deserved it. Ignoring Vernon's threats, Harry yanks open the door, heaves his trunk into the silent night, and strides away down Privet Drive, angry, homeless, but finally free of the Dursleys. Hauling his trunk through the dark streets, Harry finally collapses on a wall in Magnolia Crescent. Anger fades into panic. He's alone, penniless in the Muggle world, and, after inflating Aunt Marge, certain he's broken wizard law badly enough to be expelled. He considers an outlaw's plan: lighten the trunk, climb onto his broom under the invisibility cloak, and fly to Gringotts for cash. As he rummages for the cloak, the hairs on his neck prickle. Something huge is watching from the alley behind him, dark, dog-shaped, its eyes shining. Harry lights his wand, trips over his trunk, and before the creature can move, a deafening bang knocks him flat. A triple-decker, violently purple bus has materialized out of nowhere. The night bus, emergency transport for stranded witches and wizards. Teenaged conductor Stan Shunpike hops down and introduces the service while gawking at Harry's round glasses and lightning scar. Hoping to stay hidden from the ministry, Harry gives the alias Neville Longbottom and pays 13 sickles, with hot chocolate included, for a ride to London. Stan and the elderly driver Ernie Prang heave Harry's trunk and Hedwig's cage aboard, where brass-railed beds line wood-panelled walls and candles gutter in brackets. With another explosive bang, the night bus hurtles away, benches and lampposts leaping aside as it careens through villages, pavements and hedgerows faster than Muggle eyes can follow. Between stops, Stan scans the Daily Prophet. The front-page photo shows the same gaunt, long-haired man Harry glimpsed on Muggle TV, Sirius Black, the most infamous prisoner ever held in Azkaban, still at large after an unprecedented breakout. Stan explains with relish that Black, once a devoted supporter of you-know-who, slaughtered 13 people with a single curse and laughed when captured. His escape has every witch and wizard on edge, and even hardened Ernie shudders at the mention of Azkaban's soul-sucking guards. Harry's stomach knots. Any moment Stan might be telling passengers that Harry Potter, fugitive Aunt Inflator, rode this very bus. At dawn, he is the last traveller left. One final bang deposits the night bus outside the shabby inn called the Leaky Cauldron, gateway to Diagon Alley. As Harry thanks Stan and Ernie, a firm hand lands on his shoulder. It belongs to Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic. Inside a private parlour, Fudge waves off an ecstatic Stan, orders tea from toothless landlord Tom, and sits Harry by the fire. To Harry's astonishment, the minister isn't angry. The accidental magic reversal squad has already punctured Aunt Marge and obliviated her memory. No harm done. The Dursleys, though furious, will accept Harry back next summer, provided he stays at Hogwarts for Christmas and Easter. Even more bewildering, Fudge imposes no punishment at all. The ministry won't expel him or send him to Azkaban for a little thing like that. Instead, Fudge books Harry into room 11 of the Leaky Cauldron for the remaining 3 weeks of holiday, with 2 simple rules: remain in Diagon Alley and be back at the inn before dark. Asked about Sirius Black, Fudge turns evasive. Azkaban guards are searching, but Black is dangerously resourceful. Harry seizes the chance to request a signature for his Hogsmeade permission slip, but Fudge, no matter his rank, refuses. Rules are rules. Tom shows Harry upstairs to a cosy room where Hedwig, recently returned, perches atop the wardrobe. Exhausted yet amazed, he's not expelled, not imprisoned and blissfully free of the Dursleys. Harry collapses onto the bed, murmuring to Hedwig that it has been a very strange night, and falls asleep as the sunrise paints the sky pink and gold. Harry's first taste of complete independence feels wonderfully unreal. With Cornelius Fudge's only condition that he remain inside Diagon Alley, he can lie in each morning, order what he likes to eat, and wander the crooked, cobbled street at leisure. Breakfast in the leaky cauldron becomes a show in itself. Country witches in tweed shawls tuck into kippers before a day's shopping. Ancient wizards debate transfiguration today over soft-boiled eggs. A knot of wild-haired warlocks roars with laughter at private jokes, and once a balaclava-masked hag calmly requests a plate of raw liver. When his teacup is drained, Harry slips out to the brick wall in the yard, taps the third brick up with his wand, and the archway wriggles open to reveal gleaming shop fronts and drifting purple smoke from the street vendors' carts. Harry spends the long, golden August days window shopping, snacking under striped cafe umbrellas, and finishing essays at an outdoor table at Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlour. Fortescue himself, a cheery ice cream sage, quizzes Harry on medieval witch trials, supplies pointers for the essay on Wendelin the Weird, and rewards progress with free Sundays every half hour. After a discreet visit to Gringotts to top up his money bag, Harry discovers how hard it is not to fritter away the glittering galleons. He hovers over a solid gold gobstones set, fingers itch to buy the glass sphere galaxy model that would make astronomy effortless, and pines for a pocket lunarscope that renders moon charts obsolete. But the thought of 5 more years' supplies and the horror of begging the Dursleys for cash keeps him in check. A week into his stay, a commotion at Quality Quidditch Supplies draws him through the door. A crowd parts, and Harry sees it, a prototype Firebolt mounted on a velvet-draped stand. Its diamond-polished ash handle gleams. Each birch twig in the tail has been painstakingly tapered for perfect aerodynamics, and the spec sheet boasts 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds, plus an unbreakable braking charm. Irish national team scouts have already ordered 7, the proprietor crows, and a father tells his son they're favourites for the World Cup. The sign reads, "Price on request," and Harry, heart-hammering, knows it will cost a fortune. He reminds himself that his trusty Nimbus 2000 has never once let him down, but he still returns daily just to stare. Practical needs come first. At the apothecary, he replaces depleted bundles of knotgrass, shrivel figs and flobberworm mucus. In Madame Malkin's shop, he's measured for new black school robes. His wrists and ankles have shot past last year's hems. Then comes the book list. His third-year electives are Care of Magical Creatures and Divination. Outside Flourish and Blots, he stares bemused at the iron cage in the window, bursting with nearly 100 vicious copies of The Monster Book of Monsters, all gnawing and wrestling each other. Inside, the harassed manager, already bandaged from multiple bites, beams with relief when Harry says he owns a copy and steers him toward Cassandra Verblatsky's Unfogging the Future in the fortune-telling section. While he waits, Harry's eye lands on Death Omens. What to do when you know the worst is coming? The cover features a gigantic black dog with glowing eyes, exactly like the animal he saw in Magnolia Crescent. A chill runs through him until the manager blithely warns that people see death omens everywhere after reading it. Back in his tidy room, Tom the landlord has opened the windows to London traffic sounds. The mirror sniffs that taming his hair is hopeless. Harry reassures his reflection that the dog wasn't a portent, surely just a stray, and shoves his fringe down anyway. Diagon Alley grows busier as September 1st approaches. Harry bumps into Seamus Finnegan, Dean Thomas and the real Neville Longbottom and keeps scanning the crowd for red or bushy hair. On the holiday's final morning, after one last longing gaze at the Firebolt, he hears familiar voices outside Florian Fortescue's. Ron, sun-freckled from Egypt, and Hermione, tanned from France, wave him over. They've been searching the street for him since arriving at the Leaky Cauldron. Over Sundays, they trade stories. Hermione's parents dropped her off earlier. The Weasleys are spending the night at the inn. Ron howls with laughter at Harry's blown-up aunt tale, though Hermione scolds that it's serious magic. Harry admits Fudge's leniency mystifies him. Ron shows off his brand-new 14-inch willow wand with a unicorn hair core, bought with the Weasleys' daily profit windfall. Hermione's 3 bulging bags hold texts for arithmancy, ancient runes, muggle studies, divination, and care of magical creatures. She hopes to buy an owl for her September birthday. Ron wants tonic for his ailing rat Scabbers, who seems to have lost weight since Egypt. They cross to the magical menagerie, a cramped, cacophonous pet emporium. While a witch fits a customer for double-ended newts, Harry, Ron and Hermione examine cages of jewel-backed tortoises, top-hat rabbits, poisonous orange snails, and rats that skip with their tails. The shopkeeper, peering through black spectacles, inspects Scabbers, pronounces him elderly and powerless, and offers rat tonic, or a sleek black rat upgrade. Before Ron decides, a huge bottle-brush-tailed, bandy-legged ginger cat streaks from an upper cage, launches off Ron's head and chases Scabbers out the door. 10 frantic minutes later, they retrieve the trembling rat from beneath a bin. Hermione emerges hugging the ginger beast, Crookshanks, explaining that no one had wanted him and she simply couldn't leave him. Ron, livid and bleeding, complains that Crookshanks is a menace, but Hermione buys the rat tonic he forgot and serenely plans to keep cat and rat in separate dormitories. Back at the Leaky Cauldron, they meet Mr. Arthur Weasley, looking drawn after extra ministry shifts tracking Sirius Black. He remarks bleakly that Azkaban guards now ring Hogwarts. Mrs. Weasley soon bustles in with bags, trailed by Fred, George, Percy, gleaming new headboy badge, and Ginny, who flushes crimson at Harry. The twins ham it up, greeting Harry and their mother with absurd pomp, while Percy offers a mayoral handshake. Molly beams with pride over her second head boy, yet scolds the twins for lack of prefect ambition. Over a 5-course dinner, Tom pushes 3 tables together. Talk turns to transport. Because the Ford Anglia no longer exists, the ministry is sending 2 cars to carry their mountain of trunks to King's Cross. Fred and George tease that the HB Bonnet flags stand for humongous big head, making everyone but Percy and Mrs. Weasley choke on pudding. Later, while packing, Harry hears Percy bawling that his headboy badge has vanished and Ron complaining that Scabbers' tonic is missing. Harry volunteers to fetch it from the bar, but pauses outside the parlour on hearing Mr. and Mrs. Weasley arguing about him. Arthur insists Harry must know the truth. Black has been muttering he's at Hogwarts in his sleep. The ministry thinks he's coming to murder Harry and perhaps resurrect Voldemort. Molly argues that ignorance is kinder and that Dumbledore's presence makes Hogwarts the safest place in the world. Arthur counters that Azkaban's escape proves nowhere is impregnable. Harry slips away with the tonic, thoughts racing. On the landing, Fred and George reveal they've improved Percy's badge, so it now reads Big Head Boy. Harry forces a laugh, hands Ron the tonic, and retreats to his own room to process what he's learned. Sirius Black, the mass murderer, has escaped Azkaban for one reason: to kill Harry. Fudge's indulgence, the order to stay within Diagon Alley, and the ministry escort cars all make sudden sense. Yet Harry finds himself more irritated than frightened. Dumbledore has always been Voldemort's single greatest fear, and Azkaban guards will surround the grounds. Black will never breach Hogwarts. The real blow, Harry realizes, is that his Hogsmeade dreams may be dashed. No one will consent to let him roam village streets while a madman stalks him. Scowling at the ceiling, he mutters that he will not be murdered. His sleepy mirror approves. That's the spirit, dear. Harry drifts to sleep at last, half excited for the Hogwarts Express, half determined to prove that even Sirius Black can't clip his wings. Harry woke to Tom's tea and Ron's grumbling about Percy, then joined the Weasley uproar as Trunks, Owls and Crookshanks's wicker basket were hustled to the door of the leaky cauldron. Two dark green ministry cars materialized to whisk them to King's Cross. The velvet-suited drivers threaded impossible gaps in traffic while Mr. Weasley hovered protectively at Harry's elbow. After slipping through the barrier, Percy and Ginny burst through behind them, Percy smoothing his headboy badge for Penelope Clearwater's benefit. Harry and Ron found a nearly empty compartment at the rear of the train, its only occupant a threadbare sleeping man whose battered case read Professor R.J. Lupin. Hermione identified him at once as their new defense against the dark arts teacher. Harry tried to relay Mr. Weasley's warning about Sirius Black, but Crookshanks escaped, nearly scalping Ron in a doomed pursuit of Scabbers. Malfoy soon appeared to taunt Potty and the Weasel, but slunk off when he noticed the adult in the corner. Rain hammered the windows as twilight thickened. Without warning, the train ground to a halt. Lamps flickered out, plunging the carriage into icy darkness. The door slid open, and a towering, hooded figure glided inside. From the ragged cloak protruded a death-pale, decayed hand. It drew a rattling breath, flooding the compartment with a cold that crushed every happy thought. Harry felt himself slipping, heard distant, terrified screams, then blacked out. When he came to, the lights were back and the train was moving. Professor Lupin, pale but steady, pressed a slab of chocolate on each of them and named the intruder. A Dementor of Azkaban, one of many now hunting Sirius Black. Ron and Hermione had shivered, Neville had whimpered, but only Harry had collapsed. Ashamed and shaken, he forced down the chocolate as warmth spread back to his fingers. At rain-swept Hogsmeade Station, Hagrid gathered first years for the lake crossing, while older students crammed into horseless stagecoaches. Two more Dementors flanked the gates. Their presence sent another wave of nausea through Harry until the coach rattled past. Malfoy's greeting on the castle steps, delighted mockery of Harry's faint, was cut short by Lupin's quiet arrival. Inside, Professor McGonagall whisked Harry and Hermione to her office. Madame Pumphrey fussed, diagnosing Dementor after-effects and prescribing more chocolate. Released at last, they slipped into the great hall just after the sorting. Dumbledore welcomed everyone and, with solemn emphasis, warned that Dementors now guarded every entrance. No one was to venture off-grounds, invisibility cloaks notwithstanding. He introduced two new teachers, the shabby but capable Remus Lupin for defense against the dark arts, and, to thunderous Gryffindor cheers, Hagrid, promoted to care of magical creatures. Across the staff table, Snape's face twisted with undisguised loathing at Lupin's name. After the feast, the trio bounded over to congratulate Hagrid, who wept into his napkin. At last, they climbed through the portrait hole. "Fortuna Major," intoned Percy, and up the spiral stairs to their dormitory. As Harry drew the hangings on his four-poster, the memory of that soul-freezing cold lingered, yet the familiar creak of the tower and the soft breathing of his friends told him he was safely home. Breakfast in the Great Hall began with Malfoy putting on a swooning pantomime for the Slytherins. Hermione urged Harry to ignore it, but the jibes followed them all the way to the Gryffindor table. George pressed new timetables into their hands. Hermione's was impossibly crowded, 3 classes listed for the same hour. She waved Ron off, insisting Professor McGonagall had fixed it, though she wouldn't explain how. Hagrid bounded by, polecat dangling from one enormous fist, delighted to remind them they'd be his first lesson after lunch. Finding their way to North Tower for divination took so many stairs that Ron longed for a shortcut. Instead, they met Sir Cadogan, a pint-sized, armour-clanking knight who galloped from frame to frame, promising heroic guidance and nearly decapitating himself with his own sword. He led them to a trapdoor in the ceiling. A silver ladder dropped, and Harry climbed into Professor Trelawney's attic-like classroom, thick with crimson drapery, incense and wobbling tables. Trelawney herself drifted from the shadows like a jewelled dragonfly, great round glasses, a quavering voice, and dire pronouncements. Neville's teacup foretold trouble for Gran, Parvati was warned of a red-haired man, and the class was promised a bout of flu at Easter and the permanent departure of one of our number. When Harry and Ron swapped cups, their attempts at interpretation dissolved in giggles until Trelawney snatched Harry's. She traced shapes inside, naming a falcon, a deadly enemy, a club, a skull, then gasped and claimed the Grim, a monstrous spectral dog, the surest omen of approaching death. Neville smashed yet another cup. Lavender shrieked. Only Hermione, arms folded, muttered that it looked nothing like a Grim. Trelawney sniffed that Hermione's aura was sadly deficient. Down in Transfiguration, Harry sat beneath a silent cloud of stairs while Professor McGonagall lectured on animagi. When Hermione explained why everyone looked so jumpy, McGonagall merely pursed her lips. Trelawney predicted a student death every September, and none had occurred yet. "Potter looks perfectly healthy to me," she said. "Homework would be required unless he actually died before next Wednesday." At lunch, Lavender ogled Harry's back. Ron whispered about his Uncle Bilious who saw a Grim and died 24 hours later, and Hermione scoffed that dying of fright hardly proved prophecy. The argument lasted all the way across the lawn to Hagrid's paddock, where sleek hippogriffs waited, bronze and chestnut and storm grey beneath their eagle heads and cruel talons. Hagrid, nervous in his first lesson, reminded them to bow and never insult. Harry volunteered first, bowed, and, heart-hammering, felt Buckbeak bow back. Moments later he was clutching feathers and neck as 12-foot wings beat the air, the paddock shrinking beneath him. Cheers met the landing, except from Malfoy, who stepped forward with a drawling sneer, called Buckbeak, "You great ugly brute," and earned a slash of talons for his trouble. Blood blooming across Malfoy's arm, Hagrid rush-carried him to the castle, while Slytherins shrieked about lawsuits. Evening found Hagrid slumped over a tankard the size of a bucket, Fang's head on his knee, convinced he'd be sacked by morning. Harry, Ron and Hermione slipped from Gryffindor Tower to console him. They swore they'd tell Dumbledore the truth. Malfoy hadn't listened, but Hagrid, eyes brimming, only hugged the breath out of them and thrust them out the door, roaring that Harry must never wander the grounds after dark, Grim or no Grim, murderer or no murderer, because Hagrid wasn't worth losing their necks. The lantern light from his hut faded behind them as they trudged back up to the castle, the scent of damp grass in the air and the weight of omens, real or imagined, settling on their shoulders. By Thursday morning, Draco Malfoy had wrangled his way back to class, arm trussed in bandages and a sling as though he had survived a battlefield charge instead of a slice from Buckbeak. He sauntered into Snape's dungeon just as Gryffindors and Slytherins were halfway through brewing shrinking solutions, soaking up Pansy Parkinson's coos of sympathy before winking slyly at Crabbe and Goyle. Snape's only response to his lateness was an idle "settle down," a courtesy he had never extended to Harry or Ron. Malfoy planted his cauldron beside theirs and immediately played the invalid, asking Snape for help with every task. Snape ordered Ron to dice Malfoy's daisy roots, then forced Harry to skin his shrivel fig. When Ron's irritation produced a mound of mismatched root pieces, Malfoy complained and Snape made them swap, Ron's perfect slivers for Malfoy's mangled ones. As Ron fumed, Malfoy lowered his voice, purring about his father's unhappiness and the complaints already lodged with the governors and the ministry. Harry realized the sling was part publicity, part weapon aimed straight at Hagrid's job. Neville, meanwhile, was dissolving in panic. His potion had turned vivid orange instead of acid green, and Snape, delighted, announced that Trevor the Toad would test the results. Hermione offered to help. Snape snarled her down and promised they would all watch the aftermath. Across the classroom, Seamus whispered excitedly about a fresh Daily Prophet sighting of Sirius Black, not too far from here, which caught Harry's attention, and Malfoy's. Malfoy leaned across, eyes glittering. "If it were him," he said softly, "he wouldn't sit safely at school. He'd be out hunting Black down for revenge." Harry's confusion only fueled Malfoy's smirk. At the end of class, Snape forced Neville to administer a spoonful of his brew to Trevor. The Toad popped into a wriggling tadpole. Neville's first accidental success. Snape repaired the toad, then took 5 points from Gryffindor for Hermione's interference. As they left, Hermione reappeared panting, her bag bulging with far more books than the timetable required. A seam had ripped under the load. Ron pointed out she didn't have those classes today. Hermione brushed him off, stuffed everything back, and hurried to lunch. That afternoon, Lupin's first defense against the dark arts lesson began without books. He led the class down the corridors until they encountered Peeves plugging a keyhole with gum and singing "Loony Loopy Lupin." Lupin, unruffled, flicked the gum straight up Peeves's nose with a neat waddy-wassy. The class followed him into the staff room, passing Snape, who warned Lupin not to trust Longbottom with anything difficult unless Hermione whispered the answers. Lupin merely invited Neville to help with their demonstration. Inside a rattling wardrobe waited a boggart. Lupin explained that it would assume the shape each person feared most, and that laughter, powered by the spell ridiculous, would drive it away. Neville admitted his greatest terror was Snape. Lupin instructed him to imagine his grandmother's vulture-topped hat, green dress, fox fur scarf, and red handbag. The class formed a semicircle. Lupin tapped the wardrobe. Out stalked Snape. Neville squeaked, "Ridiculous!" and amid a whip crack, Professor Snape bloomed into lace, feathers, and handbag. The boggart reeled through shapes as Lupin sent students forward. Parvati's bandaged mummy tripped on unravelling wrappings. Seamus's banshee lost her voice. Dean's severed hand snapped into a mousetrap. Ron's giant spider lost its legs and rolled away. When the creature shot toward Harry, Lupin leapt between them. Harry glimpsed a silvery orb, a suggestion of the moon, Lupin's own fear, before the professor redirected the boggart back to Neville for one last transformation into Snape in drag and a puff of harmless smoke. Lupin awarded points liberally, extra for Neville and 5 each to Harry and Hermione for their correct answers, then assigned a summary on boggarts for Monday. The corridor buzzed with triumph, but Harry's spirits lagged. Lupin had stopped the boggart just before it reached him. Did the professor think he was too fragile after the Dementor incident? Behind them, Lavender wondered why Lupin feared crystal balls. Ron declared it the best defense class ever, while Hermione sighed that she'd have liked her own turn. Ron quipped her boggart would be a homework essay, graded 9 out of 10. Even so, Harry walked to dinner, turning Malfoy's taunt over in his mind. Revenge? For what? Only the Dementor's clammy memory darkened his thoughts more than the puzzle of Sirius Black. In no time at all, defense against the dark arts had become most people's favourite class. Only Draco Malfoy and his gang of Slytherins had anything bad to say about Professor Lupin. "Look at the state of his robes," Malfoy would say in a loud whisper as Professor Lupin passed. "He dresses like our old house elf." But no one else cared that Professor Lupin's robes were patched and frayed. His next few lessons were just as interesting as the first. After boggarts, they studied red caps, nasty little goblin-like creatures that lurked wherever there had been bloodshed. In the dungeons of castles and the potholes of deserted battlefields, waiting to bludgeon those who had got lost. From redcaps they moved on to kappas, creepy water dwellers that looked like scaly monkeys, with webbed hands itching to strangle unwitting waders in their ponds. Harry only wished he was as happy with some of his other classes. Worst of all was potions. Snape was in a particularly vindictive mood these days, and no one was in any doubt why. The story of the boggart assuming Snape's shape and the way that Neville had dressed it in his grandmother's clothes had travelled through the school like wildfire. Snape didn't seem to find it funny. His eyes flashed menacingly at the very mention of Professor Lupin's name, and he was bullying Neville worse than ever. Harry was also growing to dread the hours he spent in Professor Trelawney's stifling tower room, deciphering lopsided shapes and symbols, trying to ignore the way Professor Trelawney's enormous eyes filled with tears every time she looked at him. He couldn't like Professor Trelawney, even though she was treated with respect bordering on reverence by many of the class. Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown had taken to haunting Professor Trelawney's tower room at lunchtimes, and always returned with annoyingly superior looks on their faces, as though they knew things the others didn't. They had also started using hushed voices whenever they spoke to Harry, as though he were on his deathbed. Nobody really liked Care of Magical Creatures, which, after the action-packed first class, had become extremely dull. Hagrid seemed to have lost his confidence. They were now spending lesson after lesson learning how to look after flobberworms, which had to be some of the most boring creatures in existence. "Why would anyone bother looking after them?" said Ron, after yet another hour of poking shredded lettuce down the flobberworms' slimy throats. At the start of October, however, Harry had something else to occupy him, something so enjoyable it more than made up for his unsatisfactory classes. The Quidditch season was approaching, and Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor team, called a meeting one Thursday evening to discuss tactics for the new season. There were 7 people on a Quidditch team. 3 chasers, whose job it was to score goals by putting the quaffle, a red soccer-sized ball, through one of the 50-foot-high hoops at each end of the field. 2 beaters, who were equipped with heavy bats to repel the bludgers, 2 heavy black balls that zoomed around trying to attack the players, a keeper who defended the goalposts, and the seeker, who had the hardest job of all, that of catching the golden snitch, a tiny winged walnut-sized ball whose capture ended the game and earned the Seekers team an extra 150 points. Oliver Wood was a burly 17-year-old, now in his 7th and final year at Hogwarts. There was a quiet sort of desperation in his voice as he addressed his 6 fellow team members in the chilly locker room on the edge of the darkening Quidditch field. "This is our last chance, my last chance, to win the Quidditch Cup," he told them, striding up and down in front of them. "I'll be leaving at the end of this year. I'll never get another shot at it. Gryffindor hasn't won for 7 years now. Okay, so we've had the worst luck in the world, injuries, then the tournament getting called off last year." Wood swallowed, as though the memory still brought a lump to his throat. "But we also know we've got the best ruddy team in the school," he said, punching a fist into his other hand, the old manic glint back in his eye. "We've got 3 superb chasers." Wood pointed at Alicia Spinett, Angelina Johnson and Katie Bell. "We've got 2 unbeatable beaters." "Stop it, Oliver, you're embarrassing us," said Fred and George Weasley together, pretending to blush. "And we've got a seeker who has never failed to win us a match," Wood rumbled, glaring at Harry with a kind of furious pride. "And me," he added as an afterthought. "We think you're very good too, Oliver," said George. "Spanking good keeper," said Fred. The team started training sessions 3 evenings a week. The weather was getting colder and wetter, the nights darker, but no amount of mud, wind or rain could tarnish Harry's wonderful vision of finally winning the huge silver Quidditch Cup. Harry returned to the Gryffindor common room one evening after training, cold and stiff, but pleased with the way practice had gone, to find the room buzzing excitedly. "What's happened?" he asked Ron and Hermione, who were sitting in 2 of the best chairs by the fireside and completing some star charts for astronomy. "First Hogsmeade weekend," said Ron, pointing at a notice on the battered old bulletin board. "End of October, Halloween." "Excellent," said Fred, who had followed Harry through the portrait hole. "I need to visit Zonko's. I'm nearly out of stink pellets." Harry threw himself into a chair beside Ron, his high spirits ebbing away. Hermione seemed to read his mind. "Harry, I'm sure you'll be able to go next time," she said. "They're bound to catch Black soon. He's been sighted once already." "Black's not fool enough to try anything in Hogsmeade," said Ron. "Ask McGonagall if you can go this time, Harry. The next one might not be for ages." Ron's encouragement and Percy's condescending dismissal of Hogsmeade alike couldn't lift Harry's gloom. Without a signed form, he would be the only 3rd year stuck behind. On Halloween morning, Harry descended to breakfast, feeling thoroughly depressed. He accompanied Ron and Hermione to the entrance hall, where Filch was ticking names off his list, then trudged back through the castle alone. Colin Creevey invited him to sit, but Harry escaped with an excuse about the library, only to be shooed along by Filch for sneaking about. Wandering the corridors, he met Professor Lupin, who invited him in for tea and a look at the Grindylow he'd obtained for next week's lesson. Over tea, Harry finally asked why Lupin had kept him from facing the boggart. Lupin admitted he'd assumed the boggart would become Voldemort and didn't want to panic the staff room. Learning that Harry's true fear was the Dementors impressed the professor. That suggests what you fear most of all is fear. Very wise, Harry. Their conversation was interrupted by Snape, bearing a smoking goblet of potion for Lupin. Lupin thanked him. Snape's eyes flicked between teacher and student before he swept out. Lupin explained the potion helped when he was feeling a bit off colour, praising Snape's skill at brewing it, though Harry felt uneasy. That evening, Ron and Hermione returned from Hogsmeade, laden with honeydew sweets and tales of butterbeer, zonkos, and the shrieking shack. But Harry could barely enjoy the feast, despite its fluttering bats and pumpkin-lit splendour. Afterward, when they reached the Gryffindor corridor, they found students packed tight and silent. The fat lady's portrait had been slashed to ribbons. She had fled, terrified. Peeves, delighted by the chaos, revealed what she had screamed while running through the paintings. Sirius Black had tried to force his way into Gryffindor Tower. Professor Dumbledore sent all the Gryffindors back to the Great Hall, where they were joined 10 minutes later by the students from Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw and Slytherin, who all looked extremely confused. "The teachers and I need to conduct a thorough search of the castle," Professor Dumbledore told them as Professors McGonagall and Flitwick closed all doors into the hall. "I'm afraid that, for your own safety, you will have to spend the night here. I want the prefects to stand guard over the entrances to the hall, and I am leaving the head boy and girl in charge. Any disturbance should be reported to me immediately," he added to Percy, who was looking immensely proud and important. "Send word with one of the ghosts." Professor Dumbledore paused, about to leave the hall, and said, "Oh yes, you'll be needing—" One casual wave of his wand and the long tables flew to the edges of the hall and stood themselves against the walls. Another wave, and the floor was covered with hundreds of squashy purple sleeping bags. "Sleep well," said Professor Dumbledore, closing the door behind him. The hall immediately began to buzz excitedly. The Gryffindors were telling the rest of the school what had just happened. "Everyone into their sleeping bags," shouted Percy. "Come on now, no more talking. Lights out in 10 minutes. "Come on," Ron said to Harry and Hermione. They seized 3 sleeping bags and dragged them into a corner. "Do you think Black's still in the castle?" Hermione whispered anxiously. "Dumbledore obviously thinks he might be," said Ron. "It's very lucky he picked tonight, you know," said Hermione, as they climbed fully dressed into their sleeping bags and propped themselves on their elbows to talk. "The one night we weren't in the tower." "I reckon he's lost track of time being on the run," said Ron. "Didn't realize it was Halloween. Otherwise he'd have come bursting in here." Hermione shuddered. All around them, people were asking one another the same question. How did he get in? "Maybe he knows how to apparate," said a Ravenclaw a few feet away. "Just appear out of thin air, you know." "Disguised himself, probably," said a Hufflepuff 5th year. "He could have flown in," suggested Dean Thomas. "Honestly, am I the only person who's ever bothered to read Hogwarts, a history?" said Hermione crossly to Harry and Ron. "Probably," said Ron. "Why?" "Because the castle's protected by more than walls, you know," said Hermione. "There are all sorts of enchantments on it to stop people entering by stealth. You can't just apparate in here. And I'd like to see the disguise that could fool those Dementors. They're guarding every single entrance to the grounds. They'd have seen him fly in too, and Filch knows all the secret passages. They'll have them covered." "The lights are going out now," Percy shouted. "I want everyone in their sleeping bags, and no more talking." The candles all went out at once. The only light now came from the silvery ghosts, who were drifting about talking seriously to the prefects, and from the enchanted ceiling, which, like the sky outside, was scattered with stars. With that and the whispering that still filled the hall, Harry felt as though he was sleeping outdoors in a light wind. Once every hour, a teacher would reappear in the hall to check that everything was quiet. Around 3 in the morning, when many students had finally fallen asleep, Professor Dumbledore came in. Harry watched him looking around for Percy, who had been prowling between the sleeping bags, telling people off for talking. Percy was only a short way away from Harry, Ron and Hermione, who quickly pretended to be asleep as Dumbledore's footsteps drew nearer. "Any sign of him, Professor?" asked Percy in a whisper. "No, all well here. Everything under control, sir." "Good. There's no point moving them all now. I've found a temporary guardian for the Gryffindor portrait hole. You'll be able to move them back in tomorrow." "And the fat lady, sir?" "Hiding in a map of Argyllshire on the second floor. Apparently she refused to let Black in without the password, so he attacked. She's still very distressed, but once she's calmed down, I'll have Mr. Filch restore her." Harry heard the door of the hall creak open again, and more footsteps. "Headmaster?" It was Snape. Harry kept quite still, listening hard. "The whole of the third floor has been searched. He's not there. And Filch has done the dungeons. Nothing there either." "What about the astronomy tower, Professor Trelawney's room, the owlery? All searched?" "Very well, Severus. I didn't really expect Black to linger." "Have you any theory as to how he got in, Professor?" asked Snape. Harry raised his head very slightly off his arms to free his other ear. "Many, Severus, each of them as unlikely as the next." Harry opened his eyes a fraction and squinted up to where they stood. Dumbledore's back was to him, but he could see Percy's face, rapt with attention, and Snape's profile, which looked angry. "You remember the conversation we had, Headmaster, just before, the start of term?" said Snape, barely opening his lips. "I do, Severus," said Dumbledore, and there was something like warning in his voice. "It seems almost impossible that Black could have entered the school without inside help. I did express my concerns when you appointed—" "I do not believe a single person inside this castle would have helped Black enter it," said Dumbledore, and his tone made it so clear that the subject was closed that Snape didn't reply. "I must go down to the Dementors," said Dumbledore. "I said I would inform them when our search was complete." "Didn't they want to help, sir?" said Percy. "Oh, yes," said Dumbledore coldly, "but I'm afraid no Dementor will cross the threshold of this castle while I am headmaster." Percy looked slightly abashed. Dumbledore left the hall, walking quickly and quietly. Snape stood for a moment, watching the headmaster with an expression of deep resentment on his face. Then he too left. Harry glanced sideways at Ron and Hermione. Both of them had their eyes open too, reflecting the star-scattered ceiling. "What was all that about?" Ron mouthed. A watery dawn crept across the hospital wing windows, tinting the white sheets a subdued silver and glinting off the jagged shards of Harry's ruined nimbus. Madame Pumphrey, bustling in a cloud of camphor, tried more than once to vanish the debris, but Harry clutched the fragments as though they were a pet. Visitors arrived in a cheerful procession. Hagrid's turnip-scented cabbage-like flowers, Ginny's hand-painted card that screeched its good wishes, the entire Gryffindor team with Oliver Wood drifting behind them like a hollow-eyed ghost. Their good-natured chatter slid off Harry's mood. None of them knew he now feared a great black dog and the chilling echoes the Dementors dragged from his past. Monday brought sluicing rain and the rowdy corridors of Hogwarts. Malfoy found fresh purpose in miming spectacular broom crashes. In potions he lurched about groaning until Ron, no longer able to stand it, flung a crocodile heart at him and earned Gryffindor a 50-point dock from a delighted Snape. After lunch, Harry trudged toward Defense Against the Dark Arts, half dreading another Snape ambush, but Professor Lupin was back, noticeably thinner, eyes shadowed yet bright. The class unloaded complaints about the werewolf essay Snape had assigned. Lupin promised to speak to him, then produced a lantern-like glass containing a wispy hinky-punk, its smoky body bobbing up and down. The soft lamp glow and Lupin's calm explanations held the room in a gentle hush. When the bell rang, he asked Harry to remain. In the pale winter light, Harry admitted that Dementors made him relive the last moments of his mother's life. Lupin, voice low and steady, explained that Dementors thrived on despair and that Harry's early loss gave them a larger feast than most. He agreed to teach Harry a defensive charm after Christmas, when term calmed and his own strength returned. December settled cold and sparkling over the grounds. Fairy lights twinkled in charms. The great hall smelled of spiced fir. Ron and Hermione vowed to stay for the holidays so Harry wouldn't be alone. When the final Hogsmeade weekend dawned under swirling snow, Harry resigned himself to an afternoon with which broomstick, until Fred and George beckoned him into a dusty third-floor classroom and unveiled a ragged square of parchment. One mischievous oath, "I solemnly swear I am up to no good," sent ink lines snaking outward until a fully alive map of Hogwarts sprawled before him, complete with flickering footprints and secret tunnels. Only one passage, beneath the stone witch's hump, remained usable and, according to the twins, opened in the cellars of Honeydukes. Curiosity beating faster than caution, Harry tapped the statue, whispered Descendium, and slid into a narrow, root-veined chute. He followed the earthy tunnel for what felt like an hour, then climbed a worn staircase to a trap-door in Honeyduke's storeroom. With the shopkeeper rummaging for jelly slugs, Harry slipped upstairs into a sugar-scented bustle, shelves piled with rainbow bonbons, peppermint toads hopping in glass terraria, and clouds of cocoa dust drifting through warm air. Near the unusual tastes tray, he tapped Ron's shoulder. Ron gaped, Hermione squeaked, and after a hushed quarrel, "No signed form, Harry," she grudgingly let him stay, just for the afternoon. The snow outside was thick as eiderdown when they pushed into the 3 broomsticks. Inside, firelight gleamed on brass jugs, butterbeer steam curled through wooden rafters. Madame Rosmerta's laugh rang over the hubbub as she served tankards. Harry wrapped frozen fingers around the hot, frothy drink, melting from the inside out, until a gust announced new arrivals. Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick, Hagrid and, worse, Cornelius Fudge tromped in, shaking snow from cloaks. In a flash, Ron and Hermione yanked Harry under their table. Hermione whispered a levitation charm, and the neighbouring Christmas tree slid across, masking them behind pine branches. Crouched amid fallen needles, Harry listened as drinks were ordered, mulled mead, gilly water, red currant rum, and conversation turned to Sirius Black. Fudge's voice dropped, but every syllable reached Harry through the bristling boughs. The minister recounted how the Potters had trusted Black with their hiding place under the Fidelius charm, how Black had betrayed them to Voldemort, and how Peter Pettigrew, tearful, cornered, had confronted Black only to be blasted into scraps of robe and a single finger. McGonagall's voice trembled that she had once taught them. Hagrid swore he would have torn Black limb from limb. Fudge described arriving at the cratered street, Muggle witnesses screaming, Black laughing over the wreckage. In Azkaban, he added, Dementors seemed unable to break Black's calm. He'd even asked for a newspaper crossword. By the time the teachers rose to leave for supper at the castle, Harry's insides felt hollow and ringing. James Potter's best friend, Harry's own godfather, had sold his parents to Voldemort and murdered their other friend. Snow still spiraled outside the window, butterbeer still steamed, but the world had tilted. As the last footfalls faded, Harry, Ron and Hermione emerged from beneath the fragrant branches, faces pale in the hearthlight, each of them knowing that nothing would be quite the same after the truths spilled in that warm, crowded inn. A watery sunrise spilled over the castle, yet Harry scarcely noticed the pale light touching the snowy turrets. His mind raced so fiercely that the return journey, back through Honeyduke's cellar, along the earthen tunnel, and up the spiral staircases, passed in a blur. By the time he reached Gryffindor Tower, his pulse still hammered with the truth he had just overheard. Sirius Black, best man at his parents' wedding, had delivered them to Voldemort. Dinner that evening swirled around him like background noise. Percy's pompous chatter, the twins' rowdy jokes, the clatter of cutlery, none of it pierced the fog gathering in Harry's thoughts. Upstairs, Fred and George had let off half a dozen dung bombs in raucous celebration of the holidays, but Harry slipped past the smoke and laughter to the quiet dormitory. His fingers found Hagrid's leather-bound photo album. He yanked the curtains around his bed and flipped pages until the wedding portrait appeared. There stood James Potter, untidy hair, broad grin, and Lily radiant in ivory lace. Between them, smiling just as broadly, was a dark-haired man with mischievous grey eyes. The laughter in that face twisted Harry's stomach. How long after this photograph had Black begun feeding secrets to Voldemort? Had he already planned the betrayal? Harry snapped the album shut so violently that the clasp rang. He shoved it away, crawled under the blankets, and stared into the darkness where Sirius Black's traitorous grin seemed to hover. Sleep didn't come. Only the familiar refrain of his mother's last scream, echoing whenever Dementors neared, kept replaying in his mind until dawn bled through the curtains. Ron's pillow thumped Harry awake near midday. One glance in the mirror showed dark crescents beneath Harry's eyes. Down in the common room, Hermione had converted 3 tables into a fortress of homework. Crookshanks dozed before the fire, while Scabbers trembled in Ron's pocket. Hermione tiptoed around the topic that filled all their thoughts, but Ron blurted it out, "Don't do anything reckless." Harry tried to explain the Dementors' effect, the way they dragged out his mother's final moments, but his friends could only stare, horrified. Hermione urged caution. Ron called Black a lunatic not worth chasing. Their concern, meant kindly, only deepened the tight knot in Harry's chest. Doing nothing felt unbearable. A savage wind rattled the window panes, and Ron suggested a diversion: visit Hagrid. Hermione worried about rules. Harry agreed at once, partly for the walk, partly to ask why Hagrid had never mentioned the betrayal. The snowy lawns glittered under a pewter sky as they trudged to the edge of the forest. No smoke rose from Hagrid's chimney, yet a low, heart-rending moan carried through the door. When Hagrid finally opened it, his eyes were red-rimmed and his enormous frame shook with sobs. He collapsed onto Harry's shoulder, nearly flattening him. Amid the havoc of the cabin, Fang whimpering, a half-butchered ferret tossed to Buckbeak, lay an official parchment. The Ministry had scheduled a hearing for the Hippogriff attack. Lucius Malfoy's complaint had reached the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, and Buckbeak faced a sentence that ended with an executioner's axe. Tea, oversized handkerchiefs, and awkward pats on the arm eventually coaxed Hagrid into calmer tears. Memories of his short stay in Azkaban spilled out, how the Dementors sucked every happy thought away until he prayed to stop feeling altogether. The prospect of losing Buckbeak and perhaps facing imprisonment again had broken the gamekeeper's usual resilience. Ron, Hermione and Harry promised to build a defense. Hermione vowed to scour the library for precedent. Ron attempted comfort with clumsy jokes about flobberworms. As they left, Hagrid managed a watery smile, but Harry's heart felt no lighter. Rage at Black still pulsed beneath every thought. Term ended, students departed, and Christmas draped the castle in evergreen garlands and charmed fairy lights. Snow dusted the ledges outside the common room windows. Only a handful of pupils remained, so on Christmas morning the Great Hall boasted a single table for 12. Dumbledore presided in jocund spirits. Trelawney arrived late, predicting doom for the first to rise. Snape glowered under a vulture-topped hat produced by a wizard cracker. The merriment felt odd in such an intimate circle, but tasted delicious all the same. Back in the dormitory, Ron's shout of "Presents!" cut through the quiet. Mrs. Weasley's annual scarlet jumper lay on Harry's pile, but tucked beneath it, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a sleek length of ebony wood and silver inlay. The package unfurled to reveal a Firebolt, the fastest racing broom in the world, so new that Which Broomstick had published only rumors of its top speed. It hovered obediently when Harry released it, humming like a living thing. There was no card. Ron's theories tumbled out. Dumbledore? Lupin? A secret admirer? But Hermione's brow furrowed. An anonymous, exorbitant gift just after Harry's broom had been destroyed? Her unease sharpened when Crookshanks leapt at Scabbers, sending the sneakerscope shrilling across the floor. While Ron nursed his scratched pajamas and frayed temper, Hermione slipped out of the room. Lunchtime found the trio at the single table in the hall. Soon after, Hermione re-entered with Professor McGonagall beside her. The Transfiguration teacher's eyes fixed on the Firebolt with professional suspicion. No label, no sender, no provenance. She confiscated it on the spot for a full Jinx inspection by Madam Hooch and Professor Flitwick. Harry spluttered protests. Ron shouted, but Hermione's face stayed pale and resolute. When the portrait hole sealed behind McGonagall and the Firebolt, Ron rounded on Hermione, accusing her of jealousy and disloyalty. Hermione, voice trembling, declared she cared more for Harry's life than for broomsticks. Sirius Black might have sent the gift, and a cursed handle could throw Harry to his death. Her words echoed in the tense silence that followed. Crookshanks watched from the hearth, tail lashing. Scabbers shivered inside Ron's pocket. Snow pressed against the windows, muffling the castle in white hush. Harry stared at the place where the Firebolt had been, torn between admiration for Hermione's caution and a fresh wave of bitterness. Even his brightest Christmas gift lay shadowed by Sirius Black. Snow still pressed against the windows when the holiday quiet finally broke, but Harry's mood stayed raw. A few glorious hours of owning the fastest broom in existence had ended with McGonagall marching the Firebolt away for testing, and every time he pictured it dismantled on a workbench, he clenched his fists. Ron fumed with him. Hermione, certain she'd saved Harry's life, spent her days barricaded behind library towers rather than face their scowls. Classes resumed in a bracing January wind. On the lawn, Hagrid cheered them up with a crackling bonfire and sapphire-skinned salamanders that wriggled through the embers. The warmth faded quickly, however. Trelawney spent the next lesson prodding Harry's palm and sighing over his vanishing lifeline, while Wood cornered Harry after supper, pale with worry that Dementors might scupper Gryffindor's next match. Harry, thinking of Lupin's promise, assured his captain he was working on it. 2 nights later, in the drafty History of Magic classroom, Lupin dragged in a rattling packing case. Out of its lid rose a boggart that twisted itself into a hooded Dementor. Lamps guttered, breath misted, and Harry fought the ice seeping into his bones. Expecto Patronum! A thread of silver vapour slipped from his wand, then vanished as his mother's scream flooded his head. Lupin brought chocolate and quiet praise. Harry only tasted frustration. A second try produced the echo of his father's shout and a cold sweat. On the third attempt, clinging to the memory of his Hogwarts letter, Harry forced out a hazy, moon-bright guardian, insubstantial, but enough for Lupin to call it a promising start. Exhaustion clung to Harry like cobwebs, yet the lessons continued, crammed between Wood's 5-a-week practices. By mid-February he could hold a misty shield for several heartbeats, though the effort left him shaking. Lupin consoled him with butterbeer and grim tales of the Dementor's kiss. Souls siphoned through a shadowy mouth, and Harry shuddered, half in horror, half in vindictive hope that such a fate awaited Sirius Black. News of the Firebolt burst back into his life when McGonagall intercepted him outside Transfiguration, eyes gleaming behind square spectacles. "We found no curse," she said, handing the broom across as though it were crown jewels. Harry's knees went watery with relief. Wood nearly wept with joy. Back in the common room, a jubilant crowd lifted the broom like a trophy. Only Hermione remained at her corner desk, quill scratching. Harry crossed the room and set the Firebolt carefully beside her. "All clear," he said, a tentative olive branch. She managed a small smile, yet Ron's glare still crackled between them. That fragile truce shattered an hour later. Ron's scream tore down the dormitory stairs. He burst into the common room brandishing a blood-spotted sheet and shaking with fury. Scabbers' cage lay empty upstairs, its bottom smeared red, and long ginger hairs clung to the blanket. "Look what your cat's done!" he yelled at Hermione, who stared in horror as Ron's evidence fluttered onto her rune translation. Crookshanks, curled near the hearth, watched the scene with slow, unblinking eyes, while snow whispered against the glass and the Firebolt gleamed, silent and perfect, beside the abandoned chessboard. Midwinter tension settled over Gryffindor Tower like an icy draught. Ron mourned Scabbers, certain Crookshanks had swallowed the wheezing rat whole, while Hermione refused to accept any accusation that began and ended with "ginger hairs on a sheet." Harry tried refereeing, but every attempt to show Ron the obvious evidence only earned him Hermione's tear-bright fury. First the firebolt, now the rat. Apparently everything is my fault. With the trio splintered, Harry turned to Quidditch as his single reliable escape. On a late January afternoon, the pitch lay under streaks of mauve cloud, breath crystallizing in the air. Madame Hooch, intrigued by the firebolt, barked an impromptu broom review that sounded suspiciously like a Witch Broomstick article. Once she pronounced it a thoroughbred, Harry finally kicked off. The effect was intoxicating. Handling felt intuitive, as if the broom anticipated pressure from his fingertips, and every dive blurred the stands into charcoal and emerald stripes. Fred whooped when Harry reclaimed the snitch twice in under half a minute, and Wood, normally a volcano of instructions, could only mutter a reverent perfect. Ron, shivering in the shadowed seats, forgot his grief for 10 minutes and later rode the firebolt with a grin usually reserved for Christmas morning. Their walk back across the frost-silvered grass ended with a scare. 2 luminous eyes glinted from a budding beech. Ron's stone brandishing confirmed it was only Crookshanks, but Harry's heart had lurched at first, imagining the spectral hound of Trelawney's grim predictions. Next day, the Great Hall crackled with excitement. Gryffindors fanned around the firebolt in a protective semicircle, while the Slytherin table stared, scandalized. Malfoy sneered about parachutes for Dementors. Harry retorted that Malfoy might prefer an extra hand to catch the snitch for him. The exchange left red and gold robes rippling with laughter and green and silver ones in glowering silence. The February sky presented a perfect Quidditch canvas, pale blue, a susurrus of high breeze. Ravenclaw, cobalt kits gleaming, fielded Cho Chang on her Comet 260. Harry noticed her quick, measured smile and felt an unfamiliar flutter in his stomach that had nothing to do with nerves. Hooch's whistle cut the silence. Scarlet and blue shapes rose like fireflies. Lee Jordan's commentary drifted across the stands, equal parts play-by-play and firebolt advertisement, until McGonagall's stern cough reined him in. Katie Bell's early goal opened the scoring, but Harry hovered above the melee, eyes raking the sun-washed air for gold. The first glimpse of the snitch sent him and Cho into parallel dives. A rogue bludger forced Harry to break away. The tiny sphere vanished. Play tightened. Ravenclaw slipped in 3 goals, shrinking the margin. Deciding to shake Cho's tailing tactics, Harry faked a plummet, then pulled into a steep climb. She followed and lost vital yards. There, in the northern quadrant, glimmering near Ravenclaw's hoops, the snitch danced again. He accelerated, wind keening in his ears, and 3 black-hooded figures materialized beside the goalposts. Cold flooded his veins. Summoning everything Lupin had drilled into him and never taking his eyes off the snitch, Harry thrust his wand forward. Expecto Patronum! A brilliant, nebulous guardian erupted, hurtling at the cloaked shapes. In that same breath he closed his fist around the snitch. Whistles shrilled, scarlet cheers detonated. Gryffindor jerseys mobbed him. Even Hagrid's roar boomed from beyond the hoops. But at the pitch edge, Professor Lupin led Harry to an unexpected scene. Professor McGonagall looming over 4 struggling Slytherins. Malfoy perched on Goyle's shoulders inside a tangle of bargain bin Dementor costumes. Detentions flew, 50 Slytherin points vanished, and the stands erupted in delighted outrage. Back in the common room, the victory party spanned daylight to moonrise. Fred and George disappeared, returning with contraband butterbeer and Honeyduke's sweets. Acquired with assistance from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, Fred whispered to Harry. Gold foil wrappers littered the carpet, butterbeer fizzed, and someone magicked charmed snitches to zigzag among the rafters. Only Hermione sat apart, half hidden behind home life and social habits of British muggles. When Harry invited her to join, she muttered about 400 pages due Monday and shot a wary glance at Ron. Ron, still raw over Scabbers, retaliated by reminiscing loudly about how much his poor rat used to love Fudge flies. Hermione fled upstairs in tears, book clutched like a shield. The revelry ended near 1 o'clock, when McGonagall, hairnet askew, ordered bed. The dormitory curtains had barely stopped swaying when a blood-chilling scream ripped the night. Harry jerked awake. Dorm mates fumbled for wands. Ron clutched torn hangings, eyes wild, gasping that Sirius Black, knife in hand, had stood over his bed. In the common room, students spilled from stairwells, faces bleary. Percy attempted damage control, declaring nightmares, but Ron jabbed at the slashed drapes. McGonagall's incredulity turned to horror when Sir Cadogan proudly admitted he'd allowed a man in. He had the passwords, noble lady, written on parchment. Her glare swept the gathering until one terrified squeak pinpointed the culprit. Neville Longbottom, clutching his frog-patterned pyjamas, understood that misplacing a week's passwords had opened Gryffindor Tower to a murderer. The victory glow guttered, replaced by raw fear and the realization that the chase for Sirius Black had slipped terrifyingly inside the castle walls. Sleep was a stranger in Gryffindor Tower. After Sirius Black's midnight break-in, the common room became a vigil site. Blankets dragged from dormitories, candles melting to nubs, while students pressed ears to the portrait hole, waiting for distant hoof-like footfalls to signal Black's capture. Dawn finally seeped through the windows as Professor McGonagall re-entered in a tartan dressing gown, face grey with exhaustion. Her verdict, escaped again, plunged the room into stunned silence. By breakfast, the castle had transformed. Armour clanked into new positions, doorframes bristled with protective charms, and an entire squad of trolls stomped in front of the fat lady, clubs slung like tree trunks across their backs. The restored portrait itself flinched at every sound, peering anxiously from behind her goblet of claret. Yet the third-floor statue of the one-eyed witch remained conspicuously unguarded. Harry's chest tightened whenever he passed it. Fred and George must be right. Nobody else knew the passage was there. Ron discovered a disconcerting silver lining. Overnight, he had become Hogwarts' most sought-after storyteller. Clusters of wide-eyed first-years begged for fresh retellings of the skeleton-thin killer looming over his bed, knife gleaming like ice. Ron obliged, adding extra centimeters to the blade each time. Hermione, however, refused to accept Crookshanks's guilt in Scabbers' disappearance and snapped at any implication to the contrary, which meant the trio's Cold War continued unabated. 2 mornings later, a barn owl delivered the loudest humiliation possible, a howler from Neville Longbottom's formidable grandmother. The sealed scarlet envelope smoked ominously until Neville bolted from the hall. Seconds later, her amplified fury rattled the entrance hall rafters, berating him for consorting with murderers by incompetence. Sympathy overshadowed amusement this time. No one envied Neville's trembling return. While Hedwig filched cornflakes, Harry unfolded a note in Hagrid's broad handwriting, inviting him and Ron to tea. Hermione's suspicious stare followed him out of the hall, but Hagrid's hut proved a welcome refuge. Buckbeak lounged on Hagrid's patchwork quilt, lazily dismantling ferrets, while a ghastly orange and yellow tie hung in readiness for an upcoming hearing at the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. Guilt stabbed Harry. He and Ron had promised to help with the Hippogriff's defense, yet done nothing. Hagrid's voice, rough with anxiety, cut through their apologies. Hermione, he confided, had been shouldering the research alone, visiting nightly with parchment bundles and red-rimmed eyes. "Got her heart in the right place, that one," he insisted, giant hand dwarfing his chipped teacup. Ron stared at his shoes. Harry felt heat creep up his neck. Back in the common room, a fresh notice announced a new Hogsmeade weekend. Hermione emerged from her fortress of books long enough to hiss that if Harry tried to sneak out again, she would inform McGonagall. Ron bristled. Harry's pulse quickened. Logic lost to adrenaline, they agreed on one more illicit trip, this time with invisibility cloak in tow. Saturday dawned bright and brittle. Harry slipped the Marauders' map into his robes and bid Hermione an innocent goodbye, leaving her unconvinced. He dodged Neville, muttered Descendium, and vanished down the chute. Yet fate, wearing Snape's severe face, almost caught him. The potions master surprised Harry outside the statue, suspicion gleaming in his cold eyes. Only a quick lie about a vampire essay and an on-cue appearance by Neville diverted him, though Snape's probing hand on the witch's hump set Harry's heart hammering. The Hogsmeade afternoon sparkled, Zonko's shelves overflowed, owls hooted from brass cages, butterbeer steamed in rosy windows. After purchasing armfuls of trick merchandise via Ron, Harry suggested visiting the Shrieking Shack. There they encountered Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle gloating about Buckbeak's impending execution. Invisible rage proved useful. Harry bombarded them with foul mud and slippery sludge, watching Malfoy flail in panic. The fun curdled when Crabbe's boot snagged Harry's cloak hem and his head materialized mid-air. Malfoy's horrified scream sent Harry sprinting back through the tunnel, abandoning the cloak en route. Snape was waiting. Dragged to the dungeon office, Harry endured the professor's icy triumph and barbed comparisons to his strutting father. Zonko's purchases and the folded parchment were confiscated and prodded. The Marauders' map, unwilling to betray its secrets, retaliated with gleeful insults. Keep your abnormally large nose out of other people's business, which only intensified Snape's fury. He summoned Lupin through the flue, demanding the Defense Master identify the dark artifact. Lupin's arrival shifted the tone. Eyes flicking from the map to Harry, he calmly dismissed it as a Zonko gag and pocketed it, but not before Snape hissed that the parchment originated from its manufacturers, a comment Harry didn't yet understand. Ron, breathless, crashed in to corroborate the joke shop story. Lupin hustled the boys away, then rounded on them in the entrance hall with a reprimand sharper than Snape's sarcasm. Their parents had died to keep Harry safe, he reminded, and Harry had gambled that sacrifice for Honeyduke's toffees. As they mounted the stairs, cloak still abandoned, Professor McGonagall's security trolls shuffled nearby, and Hermione stepped from behind them, clutching a letter. Her face was blotchy with tears. Hagrid had just sent word. The committee had rejected Buckbeak's defense. Execution was scheduled. The boys' quarrel evaporated in the chill of that sentence. A hippogriff's fate, and perhaps their fragile friendships, now hung on a thread, while Snape's suspicion and Black's looming shadow darkened every corridor. Sleep was a luxury the trio barely remembered after Hagrid's owl arrived. The sheet of parchment, tear-stained, crumpled, smelling faintly of smoke from his cabin hearth, confirmed their worst fear. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had sided with Lucius Malfoy. Buckbeak's reprieve was gone. Only a perfunctory appeal stood between the hippogriff and the executioner's axe. Hermione, face blotched and eyes swollen, thrust the note at Harry and Ron near the fire in the common room. "We lost. I'm allowed to bring him back. Execution date to be fixed. Beaky's enjoyed London. I won't forget the help." "Hagrid," Ron's outrage flared hotter than the logs crackling beside them. "They're petrified of Malfoy's dad," he spat. "Doddery lot couldn't spot justice if it bit 'em." Hermione dissolved again, shoulders shaking, Ron awkward, ears crimson, patted her hair like she were an agitated cat. "You won't be alone on the appeal," he promised. "We'll pull every book in the library if we have to." New hostilities. Visiting Hagrid became nearly impossible. The reinforced curfew, troll patrols and league table panic meant their only contact came during care of magical creatures. Hagrid taught class as if in a daze, voice hoarse, one enormous hand constantly resting on Buckbeak's feathered neck. Malfoy, meanwhile, paraded a bandaged arm he no longer needed, sneering every time the hippogriff was mentioned. After one particularly vicious comment on the front steps, "Wait till they lop that brute's head, maybe Hagrid'll stuff it for his mantelpiece." Hermione's temper detonated. She slapped Draco full across the face, a crack echoing off the stone archway. Crabbe and Goyle gaped like stunned trolls. Ron looked half terrified, half delighted. Even Malfoy needed a heartbeat before he gathered his dignity and fled to the dungeons, hissing threats. That same afternoon, Charms class began without Hermione. Harry could have sworn she'd walked the corridor with them, yet Professor Flitwick handed out cheering charms, and she never appeared. By lunchtime, Harry and Ron were edgy enough to abandon Treacle Tart and sprint for Gryffindor Tower, half expecting to find her hexed in a cupboard. Instead, they discovered her fast asleep over numerology and grammatica, quill still clutched between ink-stained fingers. She jolted awake, appalled she'd missed a lesson. Further proof, Ron insisted, she was attempting too much. Hermione denied it, shoved more parchment into her bag, and hurtled away to apologize to Flitwick. Divination was her last straw. Professor Trelawney, swathed in chiffon and incense, announced an early foray into crystal gazing because the fates whispered that your exam shall concern the orb. Hermione's patience snapped at the grim prediction number 3. She slammed Unfogging the Future shut, declared the class rubbish, and clambered down the trapdoor ladder, bangles jangling in her wake. Lavender Brown gasped as though someone had blasphemed. Trelawney, wide-eyed, pronounced Hermione's mind irredeemably mundane. When they caught sight of Hermione in the common room that evening, she was surrounded by tower-high stacks of parchment, quills flying like frantic insects. Harry thought the half-moon shadows under her eyes looked disturbingly like Lupin's. The holidays did not resemble holidays. Homework piled into drifts, third years staggered under armloads of books. Neville muttered grimly over herbology flashcards. Dean and Seamus practiced cheering charms on each other until they both laughed hysterically for 10 minutes straight and received a week of lines from McGonagall. Ron focused on Buckbeak's appeal as if a passing grade depended on it. He ploughed through tomes with titles such as Beaks, A Legal History, and filled rolls of parchment with precedent. Crookshanks began prowling near him without so much as a hiss. Ron was too distracted to notice. Harry's evenings disappeared into Quidditch strategy. Oliver Wood moved coloured marbles around a tiny model pitch, muttering like a general planning a siege. "Remember, Harry," he said 10 times a day, "you catch the snitch only if we're 50 points up. Repeat it." Harry repeated it in his sleep in the shower and once accidentally at breakfast when Lavender asked him to pass the marmalade. The night before the Slytherin game, the common room felt like a pressure boiler. Fred and George juggled fizzing Whizbees over heads. Angelina polished her broom so furiously the handle gleamed like glass. Even Hermione put aside ancient runes, though her eyes darted restlessly back to the closed book every minute. At midnight, Wood herded the team to bed. Harry dreamed of oversleeping and being replaced by Neville, then of Slytherin riding dragons, then of flying without his firebolt. He woke gasping, throat dry. Crossing to the window for water, he spotted Crookshanks padding across the moon-silver grass, tail twitching. A colossal black dog. The dog slid from the forest shadows beside the cat. Harry's heart hammered. If Crookshanks could see the creature, perhaps it wasn't the omen Trelawney claimed. He leaned closer, blinked, and both were gone, swallowed by darkness. Breakfast buzzed like a hive. Gryffindors sported lions on cheeks, scarlet ribbons in braids. Even nearly headless Nick wore a red and gold rosette skewered through his hat plume. The Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables thundered applause when the team entered. Slytherins hissed back. Malfoy appeared paler than parchment, eyes narrowed at Harry's firebolt. On the pitch sunlight poured from a flawless sky. Banners snapped crisply, and the stands rippled crimson and emerald. Snape, cloaked in green, wore a smile like a paper cut. Madam Hooch's whistle shrieked. 14 brooms launched into a maelstrom of cheers, and Lee Jordan's voice boomed from the megaphone. The game turned savage within minutes. Flint battered Angelina. Fred retaliated. Penalties volleyed back and forth. Still, Gryffindor pulled ahead. 30-0, then 40-10, then 50-10, as Katie's penalty soared past the keeper. Harry kept altitude, eyes sweeping for gold, brain chanting Wood's mantra. Finally, he saw the snitch glinting near a post dove, and Malfoy latched onto the firebolt's tail, yanking it brutally. The crowd erupted in outrage. Lee Jordan forgot every school rule on language. Penalty awarded. Lead still intact. Play worsened. Bludgers screamed past Wood, knocking breath from his lungs. Gryffindor nudged to 70-10. One more goal would bring the magic margin. After Harry's spectacular feint that scattered every green robe in front of Angelina, she scored, 80-20 the moment Harry needed. He spotted the snitch again, arrowed toward it, and Malfoy gave chase. Derek's club whooshed past Harry's ear. Bowles' second bludger nearly clipped his ankle. Heart pounding, Harry flattened to the firebolt, closed on the flutter of gold. Malfoy reached, arm outstretched. Harry shot one hand free, slammed Malfoy's arm aside. Fingers closed round wings, and roar upon roar detonated across the stadium. Wood sobs soaked Harry's robes as the captain clung to him mid-air. Fred and George tackled them in a joyous tangle. Scarlet waves swept the pitch, hoisting players aloft. McGonagall wept openly beneath an enormous flag. Percy punched the sky, dignity abandoned. Hagrid lumbered down from the stands, hollering about Buckbeak's reaction to the news. On the dais, Dumbledore, twinkling, handed over the massive silver cup. Sunlight caught the serpentine handles and blazed scarlet reflections across every tower and turret. The chant of "Gryffindor, Gryffindor" rolled over the grounds like thunder. As he raised the trophy, Harry felt euphoric warmth explode through him, the kind of perfect protective happiness Lupin had tried to teach. Had a Dementor drifted into the arena that instant, Harry knew the Patronus he produced would have been dazzling enough to outshine the very midday sun. Harry's triumph from winning the Quidditch Cup lingered for exactly 1 week before the castle slipped back beneath its annual exam hush. Warm breezes drifted through arrow-slit windows, carrying the smell of cut grass and lake water. Yet everyone stayed indoors, quills scratching frantically. Even Fred and George had swapped pranks for parchment. Percy, white-knuckled at the prospect of new T.S., patrolled the common room like a strict librarian. Only Hermione seemed more tightly wound than Percy, and nobody, not even Harry, dared quiz her any longer about sitting 2 classes that met at the same hour. When the exam timetables arrived, Ron goggled at Hermione's first Monday. Arithmancy and Transfiguration, both scheduled for 9 o'clock, with charms clashing perfectly with ancient runes after lunch. Hermione merely pursed her lips and went hunting for yet another lost textbook. Hedwig's arrival broke the tension. Hagrid's shaky handwriting reported that Buckbeak's appeal would be held on the 6th, the very afternoon exams ended, and that an executioner would travel to Hogwarts just in case. The 3 friends stared at each other, sick with the certainty that Lucius Malfoy had already weighted the scales. Draco, still smarting from Gryffindor's Quidditch victory, regained his swagger and took every chance to hint that the Hippogriff's fate was sealed. Transfiguration on Monday morning replaced teapots with tortoises. Instead of celebrating an easy pass, Hermione lamented that her tortoise's shell retained a faint willow pattern design. Charms followed. Harry's cheering charm was so enthusiastic, Ron needed a lie-down. Tuesday's care of magical creatures was almost painless. Keep a flobberworm alive for an hour, but Hagrid's red-rimmed eyes made the task feel anything but light. Snape-insured potions was dreadful. Harry's confusing concoction wouldn't thicken, and the professor's quill scratched a very obvious 0 beside his name. Midnight astronomy blurred into Wednesday's baking-hot herbology, leaving sunburns and a haze of fatigue. By Thursday morning, only 2 tests remained, defense against the dark arts and divination. Professor Lupin turned the lawn below his classroom into a miniature gauntlet. Grindylow paddling pool, potholes stocked with red caps, a marsh prowled by whispering hinkypunks, and finally a trunk hiding a fresh boggart. Harry earned full marks. Ron sunk waist-deep in the bog and emerged grumbling. Hermione fled the trunk in tears after her boggart morphed into Professor McGonagall, announcing she'd failed everything. Outside, Cornelius Fudge was conferring with 2 committee wizards and a heavy-built man polishing an axe. Ron bristled, Hermione paled, and Harry's stomach lurched. The executioner's presence all but screamed that the verdict on Buckbeak was already written. The last hurdle was divination. Students climbed Trelawney's ladder one at a time, returning tight-lipped about their tests. Ron emerged, muttering that he'd invented every vision. Harry entered the perfumed gloom and spent minutes staring into swirling white mist before settling on a desperate improvisation about a healthy hippogriff flying free. Trelawney sighed at his pedestrian sight, dismissed him. Then, her gaze unfocused, her voice dropped to a gravelly monotone and words poured out like ice water. The Dark Lord, bereft of allies, waits. His servant, bound these 12 years, will break free tonight and return. With that servant's hand, the Dark Lord will rise greater and more terrible than before. Before midnight, the servant sets forth. Just as abruptly, the professor blinked, unaware of what she'd said. Shaken, Harry fled the tower, unsure whether he'd witnessed real prophecy or melodramatic theatrics. In the common room, Ron and Hermione were white-faced over a fresh note from Hagrid. The appeal was lost. Execution at sunset, please don't come. Harry, heartsick, muttered about the invisibility cloak still hidden beneath the one-eyed witch. Hermione surprised them both by slipping away and returning with the cloak tucked under her robes. Recent stresses had apparently dissolved her rule-following instincts. They waited until most of the school emptied onto the lawns, then glided beneath the silver fabric, past patrols and into the evening light. The sunset stained the lake crimson. Inside Hagrid's cabin, the huge gamekeeper looked smaller than they'd ever seen him, hands shaking as he spoke of Buckbeak's last hour and Dumbledore's promise to stand witness. Milk smashed on the flagstones. Hermione's quiet cleaning was interrupted by a squeak. Scabbers, mangy and terrified, wriggled out of a jug she'd lifted. Ron scooped the rat to his chest just as voices echoed from the path. Dumbledore, Fudge, the elderly committee wizard, and McNair with his gleaming axe. Hagrid forced the trio out the back door. Cloaked once more, they skirted pumpkins toward the slope. Scabbers panicked, clawing at Ron's hands. Behind them, the front door thudded and adult voices rumbled. A breath later, a single heavy swing sliced the still air. Wood on flesh or axe on block, they couldn't tell. And Hermione sagged, whispering that it was done. The sun slipped behind the forbidden forest, the sky washed purple, and dread pooled in their stomachs. Sunset had claimed Buckbeak, and somewhere between the forest shadows and Hagrid's broken silhouette, night gathered its secrets for whatever prophecy might yet unfold. The last scarlet light of the sunset lay across the castle lawns when the echo of an axe striking wood, or flesh, froze Harry, Ron and Hermione beneath the invisibility cloak. Hagrid's raw howl broke from the hut a moment later, but Ron grabbed Harry's arm. Any sign the three of them had been down to the cabin would only make trouble worse for their friend. Hermione's breath hitched with shock and fury as she stared at the darkening sky. Buckbeak was gone. Scabbers, frenzied in Ron's grip, chose that instant to fight free. His teeth sank into his owner's hand. Ron swore, and the rat tumbled to the grass. A flash of ginger streaked from the shadows, Crookshanks, and Ron threw off the cloak, pelting after cat and rat. Harry and Hermione had no choice but to fling it aside and chase him into the gloom. They were halfway across the lawn when a shape as black as the night itself bounded out of nowhere. The huge dog, the grim from Harry's worst dreams, hurled him to the ground, then twisted away with terrifying speed. Its jaw clamped around Ron's arm. Ron's shout of pain cracked through the air. The beast dragged him, stumbling toward the whomping willow. Harry lunged, fingers scrabbling for greasy fur, but a whipping branch knocked him aside. Hermione, shrieking, yanked him back before another blow could land. Crookshanks darted beneath the flailing limbs of the tree and patted a gnarled knot on the trunk. Instantly, the willow fell still, branches frozen in mid-swing. Harry and Hermione scrambled after the cat, tumbling headfirst into a steep, earthy tunnel. Bent double in the tight passage, they followed the bobbing tip of Crookshanks's tail until the ground sloped sharply upward and a splintered floorboard appeared overhead. They clambered into a room thick with dust and moonlit cobwebs. The shrieking shack. Broken furniture lay strewn about like bones. A groan sounded above them. They climbed the rickety stairs and burst into a bedroom where Ron lay across a sagging four-poster, one leg bent at a sickening angle, Crookshanks purring on his chest. The monstrous dog was gone. In its place, a man crouched, skeletal, hollow-eyed, hair hanging to his elbows. Sirius Black raised Ron's wand and rasped an incantation. Harry and Hermione's wands shot from their hands into his. The sight of the man who had betrayed his parents swept Harry's mind bare of everything but rage. He hurled himself at Black, fists flying. Crookshanks streaked to the attack. Hermione tried to pull Harry back. Ron fell from the bed in a hopeless tangle, yet still Harry pummeled the gaunt figure until a bony hand closed on his throat. With a crack of sparks, the door flew open. Professor Lupin stormed in, disarmed everyone with a single spell, and then he crossed the room and embraced Sirius Black as though welcoming back a brother. Hermione's scream accused Lupin of treachery. She declared him a werewolf, and to Harry's horror, Lupin confessed it calmly, but denied helping Black. He had seen the whole chase on the Marauders map because he had helped create it back when he was Moony. Black was Padfoot. Ron, white-lipped with pain, yet clutching his rat, listened as Black rasped that the creature was no rat at all, but an animagus named Peter Pettigrew. Lupin demanded to see the animal. Crookshanks settled protectively at Black's side, and Harry, his fury guttering, realized everything he thought he knew about the night his parents died was about to change forever. Snape's lip curled with triumphant satisfaction as the shimmering cloak slid from his shoulders. His black eyes glittered in the half-light, fixed on Lupin with an almost feverish intensity. "Expelliarmus," he said in a low, silky voice. The 4 wands Lupin had gathered, Harry's, Ron's, Hermione's, and Black's, leapt out of his hand and soared neatly towards Snape. He caught them without so much as glancing away from Lupin, then pocketed 3 and kept Black's levelled hand steady as iron. "I have waited, oh, how I have waited for this," he whispered. 20 years I have dreamed it. You, helpless, Black, unmasked, justice, finally done." Lupin raised his empty hands, voice urgent but calm. "Severus, listen to me." "Save your breath," Snape spat. "I heard every word. I was standing right there." He jerked his head toward the open doorway. "From the moment you admitted your treachery. Long enough to confirm that Black lured innocent students out of the castle. Long enough to hear you confess to abetting him while you prowled the grounds in your bestial form. Long enough to know Potter and his friends have been aiding and abetting a murderer." "You're wrong," Harry said, stepping forward before he could stop himself. Snape's wand whipped toward him at once. "Silence, Potter. I suppose you think a few Quidditch victories exempt you from the law." "It's you who doesn't understand," Harry shot back, heart hammering. "You didn't hear the whole story." "Oh, but I did," Snape purred. "Enough to send all 3 of you to the headmaster and Black back to the Dementors." His nostrils flared. "I shall be delighted to deliver him personally." Black shifted, chains of dark hair falling across his hollow cheeks. "You think the Dementors will reward you, Severus," he croaked. "They'll take your soul as readily as mine." "Coming from you," Snape sneered. "That is almost rich." He turned once more to Lupin, voice trembling with contained fury. "Get away from him. Move to the wall. Slowly." Lupin obeyed, palms still raised. "Severus, if you brought the potion up to my office, you know I've had every dose this month. I'm not a danger to anyone." "No, you endanger students every time the moon rises," Snape retorted. "Dumbledore's lenience ends tonight." Hermione's voice, shaking but determined, broke in. "Professor Snape, please. Professor Lupin is telling the truth. Peter Pettigrew, he's alive." Snape laughed, brittle as snapping glass. "Miss Granger, spare me your naive faith in fairy tales. Pettigrew died in a street full of witnesses. Even the Muggle papers reported the blood—" "Then where's his body?" Harry demanded. "Where's Pettigrew's body, if everyone saw him die?" "Enough!" Snape's patience shattered. "All of you will march ahead of me back to the castle. Any attempt at resistance and you'll taste a dozen detentions, if not Azkaban itself. Stand aside, Black." Sirius didn't move. His grey eyes, fever-bright, darted from Harry to the trembling lump of fur in Ron's hands. "He won't believe it, Remus," he muttered. "He never would. There's only one way." Without warning, he sprang, not at Snape, but at Ron. Scabbers gave a terrified squeal, then vanished entirely beneath Black's hand. "No!" Ron yelled, falling sideways as Sirius wrested the rat free. Crookshanks streaked after them with a yowl. Snape reacted instantly. "Stupefy!" A jet of red light flashed from Black's borrowed wand. It would have hit Sirius square in the chest had Crookshanks not leapt, mid-air, colliding with Black's arm, just enough to send the spell wide. A shattered mirror exploded on the far wall. Chaos erupted. Ron bellowed in pain. Hermione screamed. Crookshanks hissed. Scabbers twisted free and shot across the floor. Black dived after him, but Snape roared, "Enough!" and whirled, wand raised to fire again. "Expelliarmus!" Harry yelled. A triple burst of light, Harry's, Ron's, Hermione's, struck Snape like a silent thunderclap. His eyes widened in shock as all the breath left him. He rose a clear foot into the air, flew backward, and crumpled against the wall, sliding to the floor unconscious. Black's wand clattered from his limp fingers. For one stunned heartbeat, the room rang with silence, broken only by Scabbers' frantic squeaks as he bolted beneath the four-poster. Harry's own wand vibrated in his fist. He stared at Snape's motionless body, then at Hermione, who looked horrified at what they had just done. Lupin exhaled a shaky breath of mingled relief and dismay. "Well," he murmured, "that complicates matters. Sirius, you'd better take Peter before he gets away again." Black was already on hands and knees, Crookshanks beside him, both peering under the bed. "He's here," Sirius growled, arms stretching into the gloom. "End of the line, Wormtail." Hermione knelt to help Ron, whose face was dead white, sweat beading his forehead. "Your leg. Oh, Ron, we have to get you to Madame Pumphrey." "In a minute," Ron gasped, eyes fixed on the bedskirt that shivered with rat-shaped terror. "Get him first." Harry stooped, retrieving his own wand from Snape's lax hand, then Black's, then the two still lying where Snape had thrown them. He glanced at the door, half expecting ghosts of the past or present to burst through, but the corridor remained empty, the house as silent as a held breath. "Remus," he said quietly, "finish the story. Then we decide what to do." Lupin nodded once, knelt beside Black, and reached under the bed. Inside the dingy room of the shrieking shack, lit only by moonlight through broken boards, the truth, long buried, long denied, was closing its jaws at last. Snape's entrance was as swift and silent as a hunting owl. One moment there was nothing but torchlit gloom. The next, the invisibility cloak slid from his shoulders, and he stood revealed, eyes glittering, chest rising with hard-won breaths, his wand fixed on Lupin. He flicked his wrist and tossed the cloak aside, a victor unveiling the last piece of evidence. "I found this draped over a root of the Whomping Willow," he announced, voice trembling with triumph. "An ingenious trinket, Potter. I thank you." He took a step deeper into the room, and Harry saw that Snape was almost shaking with exultation. "Perhaps you wonder how I discovered your little gathering. I merely paid our defense professor a courtesy call." His mouth curved. He had forgotten tonight's wolfsbane potion. I, in my infinite concern, carried it to his office, only to find on his desk that charming old map. One glance, and I knew everything. He hovered for effect, black eyes devouring each shocked face. "I watched you scamper through the passage like illicit schoolchildren and decided to intervene." Lupin began, "Severus," but Snape cut him short. "I have informed Dumbledore again and again that you, Lupin, have been funneling his old friend into the castle. Here is my proof." His gaze swept the dust-choked room. "Not even I guessed you would choose the shrieking shack as your nest." "You're wrong," Lupin tried, desperation creeping into his tone. "You haven't heard—" "Silence!" Snape's hand twitched, and ropes, thin and whip-fast, exploded from his wand. They coiled around Lupin's mouth, wrists and ankles, yanking him to the floor. Black reacted instinctively, surging forward, but Snape's wand rotated to train on him. "One more step, Black, and I won't miss." Black slowed, breathing hard, every muscle tense for the dive he could no longer make. Snape shifted his aim again, pinning Harry with a murderous glare. Harry's heart hammered. He felt Ron and Hermione stiffen behind him. Hermione found her voice first, small and tremulous. "Professor Snape, maybe we should listen to them." "Miss Granger," Snape hissed, "you are already on precarious ground. Be grateful I don't drag you directly to the headmaster." "But if there's been a mistake—" "Enough!" Sparks showered from his wand. Hermione shrank, white-faced. "2 new residents for Azkaban tonight," Snape went on in a low, delighted murmur. "A werewolf and a murderer. The Dementors will be pleased." It happened before Harry truly meant it to. He remembered Lupin's lessons, remembered him steadying Harry's own shaking hands as the boggart emerged, remembered Lupin's voice telling him to think of something happy, and then realized those same hands, kind, trusted hands, were bound and bleeding on the floor. He stepped between Snape and the door. "Move, Potter!" Harry's pulse roared in his ears. "Professor Lupin's had 1,000 chances to kill me. He never has. "And what makes you think tonight would be any different?" Snape sneered. Something inside Harry snapped. "Expelliarmus!" he shouted. Yet he was not alone. Ron and Hermione's voices joined his, 3 spells entwining like lightning. Their magic slammed into Snape, blasting him backwards. He struck the wall, slid down, and lay still. Silence crashed over them. Snape's wand landed beside Crookshanks with a dull clink. Hermione whispered, "We attacked a teacher." Black straightened slowly, eyes gleaming with equal parts gratitude and grief. "You should have left him to me," he muttered, but there was no heat in it. Lupin struggled against the ropes. Black hurried to slice them away, and Lupin staggered upright, rubbing the angry welts. "Thank you, Harry," he said softly. Harry's gaze flew to Pettigrew, still Scabbers in Ron's fist. The rat squealed like a rusty hinge, writhing for escape. Ron clutched him tighter, face pale and furious. "We need proof," Harry said, the words torn from him, half plea, half command. Lupin nodded once. "We have it." He extended his hand. "Ron, give him to me." Ron hesitated, 1 heartbeat, 2, and surrendered the rat, who shrieked and twisted as Lupin pinned him gently but firmly with a single finger. Black moved to Lupin's side, reclaimed Snape's wand, and took a shaky breath. "Ready?" "On 3, Lupin agreed. 1, 2, 3. Twin jets of blue-white light lanced from their wands. Scabbers stiffened, suspended, squeals cutting off mid-shriek, his shape contorted, bones lengthening, limbs unfurling. An adult man erupted where the rat had hung. Crookshanks hissed and arched. Ron stumbled back, green with horror. The man who crouched on the floor was small and shrunken, hair like greasy cobweb, a bald patch gleaming under dust-laden moonlight. His watery eyes darted everywhere, searching for exits. 1 finger was conspicuously missing. "Well, hello, Peter," Lupin said, voice almost conversational, though his wand never wavered. Pettigrew's voice emerged, high and reedy, scarcely human. "Remus, Sirius, my friends, you wouldn't—" Black's lips peeled from his teeth. "Don't call us that." The confrontation that followed seemed to compress the room, making the air crackle. Pettigrew pleaded, lied, fawned. Black and Lupin countered every fabrication with quiet, lethal precision. Harry watched the colour drain from Pettigrew's face as each lie collapsed under the weight of memories. The Potter's secret, the blown-apart street, the missing finger. Even the photograph from the prophet glowed in Black's shaky grasp like a relic. Finally, Lupin rolled up his sleeves. "I think we all understand now." Pettigrew collapsed to his knees. "Mercy, Harry. Your father, James, would have shown me mercy." Harry's throat burned. He saw his parents' faces, saw Voldemort's green flash, saw Hagrid sobbing on the night they died. Yet when Black and Lupin raised their wands, poised to blast Pettigrew's existence from the earth, Harry stepped between them. He did not trust his voice. Hands shaking, he shook his head. Black stared at him, shock and pain warring on his gaunt features. Lupin's wand faltered. "Azkaban," Harry managed at last, forcing each syllable. "Send him to the Dementors, but don't become killers." For a long, shuddering moment, no one moved. Then Lupin lowered his wand. Black followed, shoulders sagging. Heavy manacles materialized. Pettigrew whimpered as they clamped around his wrists. Crookshanks leapt down from the bed, tail high, as though proclaiming judgment satisfied. Snape remained unconscious, hovering inches above the floor under Lupin's mobilicorpus spell. Ron's broken leg was splintered, Hermione's lips still bled. Pettigrew moaned in his chains, and Black's eyes shone with unshed tears. Yet in the hush that followed, Harry felt the future shift, the past knit together in painful clarity. It was time to go back to the castle and face whatever dawn would bring. Harry had marched with many unlikely companies since his first ride upon the Hogwarts Express, but never one so fantastical as this. Imagine, dear reader, a ginger cat trotting ahead like a small self-appointed herald. 3 half-hobbled boys shuffling after him as though bound together in some grotesque 3-legged contest. A pallid professor floating upright, feet brushing each step as though he were a discarded marionette. And behind the lot, a gaunt, dark-haired man guiding the puppet with a wand and a grim determination. Harry and Hermione, breathless and bewildered, brought up the rear. The narrow tunnel through which they had first entered the shrieking shack seemed even closer now. One by one they squeezed between earth and root, Crookshanks vanishing ahead with silent certainty. Lupin, still pressing the point of his wand into the quaking Pettigrew's spine, edged sideways. Ron, chained to the traitor, stumbled beside him. Sirius, eyes gleaming, shoulders rigid, propelled the weightless Snape forward, so that the professor's limp head thudded against the roof with every second pace. Harry thought Sirius was not altogether sorry for each knock. Partway along that subterranean path, Sirius spoke in a voice as rough as gravel, yet very quietly, as though the words were nearly too large for the tunnel. "You understand what will follow once we hand Pettigrew over?" Harry nodded, though Sirius could not see the gesture. "You'll be free." A pause, sharp, hopeful, free, and something more. "No one has ever told you, perhaps, but I was named your godfather." "I know," Harry whispered, heart kicking inside him like a caged snitch. "Your parents asked that I be your guardian." Sirius cleared his throat as if the very notion bruised it. "Once my name is cleared, you may, well, if you prefer the life you have, I shall understand. Yet if you wished for another home—" Words exploded in Harry's chest. They spilled out in a clatter so fervent that he cracked his head on an overhanging root. "Live with you? Leave the Dursleys? When can I pack?" Sirius stopped dead. Snape bumped into the tunnel roof and swayed. Slowly, almost fearfully, Sirius turned until his hollow eyes found Harry's in the gloom. Then, like sunrise breaking upon a ruin, his face remembered youth, and he smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in 12 long years. They emerged upon Hogwarts grounds beneath a sky in which only the castle windows shone like distant lanterns. Pettigrew wheezed, Ron limped, and Harry's mind whirred with bright, impossible pictures of bedrooms without bars and meals, without insults. Nearer and nearer the silent school loomed, until the moon, slipping from a curtain of cloud, painted the grass silver. Lupin froze. A shiver ran through him, no ordinary shiver, but a tremor that travelled bone to fingertip, cruel as midwinter wind. Hermione's breath caught. "His potion!" she rasped. "He never took it." In one heartbeat Lupin was man, in the next less than man and more than beast. Limbs lengthened, spine convulsed, fur sprang like dark fire over his skin. Crookshanks yowled and arched. Panic ripped the little procession apart. Sirius flung Harry aside, "Run!" and burst into black fur himself, larger than any living dog ought to be. Chains snapped, Pettigrew dove, Ron crashed to the ground. The werewolf and the dog collided with a sound like thunder in a hollow valley, jaws meeting, claws scoring hide. Harry, heart hammering, reached for discarded wands, but Pettigrew's rat-quick hands found one first. A flash, Ron crumpled. Another flash, Crookshanks was hurled aside. Harry shouted a spell, disarmed the traitor, but a pale blur of fur and tail vanished into night as Pettigrew slipped his bonds and fled. A terrible howl rolled away toward the forest. The werewolf had broken free and was gone. Sirius, blood matting his dark coat, sprinted after the betrayer and the beast alike. The grounds fell sudden and eerily quiet. Ron unconscious, Snape suspended, Hermione trembling, Harry braced and bewildered beneath the moon. Then came the chill. It crept across the grass like spilled ink, and even before Harry named it, he knew. Somewhere beyond the lake, a great company of Dementors gathered, gliding over the water as vultures gather upon a battlefield, whose outcome they never doubted. The chill became a storm of cold, stealing warmth, then hope, then thought. There upon the shore, Sirius had fallen back into human form, hands clutching his matted hair. Harry ran, Hermione hard at his heels, until they skidded to the lakeside. The Dementors closed in, a full 100, perhaps more, hemispheres of night pressing out every star. "Happy thoughts," Harry bellowed, though his own mind faltered. Yet one beam of light remained. "I shall live with my godfather. The cupboard is finished forever." He seized that single shining truth and thrust his wand forward. "Expecto Patronum!" Silver mist poured but scarcely held shape. Hermione muttered the incantation, voice breaking, and the mist thinned. She sagged to her knees. Another breath, and Harry's meagre light guttered. Hands, clammy, corpse-cold, closed about his throat. A hood slipped back, and where eyes ought to dwell, only leathern emptiness stared. Its mouth, vast and hollow, drew breath enough to extinguish whole summers. Harry fought to raise the wand once more, but terror pinned him as surely as iron nails. The world shrank to a scream, his mother's scream, and then that too began to fade. Out of the blackness bloomed brilliance. Pure white living light flooded the bank as though the moon itself had taken mortal shape. A creature, equine in stature yet more radiant than any earthly horse, charged between Harry and the ring of Dementors. Its hooves struck sparks of dawn on the grass, its mane streamed like banners of morning. The Dementors recoiled, shriveling before that wordless rebuke. They scattered across the lake, melting into the far side shadows. Harry, half conscious, saw the silver creature trot away, pause upon the opposite shore, and lower its noble head to someone who lifted a hand in greeting, someone whose outline, blurred by tears and exhaustion, seemed achingly familiar. Then darkness veiled his sight, the bank met his cheek, and all thought fell silent. So the night ended, not with the despair the Dementors had designed, but with a promise as bright and sudden as dawn. A godfather's smile, a house not yet seen, and hope that, like the Patronus itself, could not be caged for long. If you have ever been half awake after a feverish dream, you will understand how misty the world appeared to Harry in the first moments of this tale. Voices floated to him like slow clouds, full of pomp and self-importance. Miraculous they survived, really. Marvelous presence of mind, Snape, boomed the Minister of Magic, somewhere beyond a half-open door. Severus Snape, basking in borrowed heroics, purred back. "Your generosity overwhelms me, Minister. Potter, Weasley and Granger, alas, were distinctly less helpful. I fear Black put them under a confundus charm." Harry, head aching, limbs heavy as stone, lay in the moon-washed hospital wing and felt the accusation dribble through the crack beneath the door. Hermione caught his eye across the ward, raised a warning finger to her lips, and pointed at the source of the voices. Harry only half understood. The words seemed to swim through treacle before they reached his mind. Madame Pumphrey came bustling with a slab of chocolate, large enough to silence a giant. "Eat!" she ordered. "No one tangles with Dementors and escapes without chocolate." But Harry, propping himself on an elbow, ignored the sweet and reached for his wand. "I must see the headmaster," he croaked. Chaos followed. The minister strode in. Snape swept behind him like a discontented raven, and both were soon trying, quite unsuccessfully, to persuade Harry that Sirius Black was guilty, valiant Snape was correct, and the Dementors were even now preparing to suck the soul from the most dangerous criminal of the age. Madame Pumphrey thrust chocolate between Harry's teeth. Snape thundered about suspension. The minister tut-tutted about youthful folly. And at the crescendo of this noisy opera, the ward door opened once more, letting in Professor Dumbledore, whose quiet presence fell upon the others like snow upon noisy birds. "Poppy, Cornelius, Severus," he said, "leave me with my young friends a moment." Something in his voice, gentle yet adamant, sent them away muttering. When the door shut, Dumbledore bent close and spoke in a voice soft enough to hush storms. "Time is short," he told Harry and Hermione. "There is no shred of proof that will sway the good minister tonight. Therefore, we must acquire proof that does not yet exist. In other words, we require time." His twinkling eyes flicked to Hermione. "Miss Granger, 3 turns should suffice." Harry blinked. Hermione, however, plunged a hand beneath her robes and drew out a chain of fine gold on which swung a minute hourglass. Without further ceremony, she looped it over Harry's neck, flicked the glass thrice, and the world spun backward. Sunlight slapped the flagstones of the entrance hall. Brooms and mildewed buckets crowded around the pair as Hermione tugged Harry into a cupboard. "We're 3 hours in the past," she whispered, eyes bright with equal parts fear and exhilaration. "Dumbledore means us to save more than one innocent life, Buckbeak and Sirius." Through the slats of the door, they heard the other Harry and Hermione, cloaked and unsuspecting, hurry toward Hagrid's cabin. It was like hearing an echo that spoke before the voice itself. Presently the two time-travellers slipped outside, skirting glass house and greenhouse until they crouched within the fringe of the forbidden forest. There stood Buckbeak, dull chains upon his 4 talons, his fierce eyes fixed on nothing in particular. "Not yet," Hermione counselled, as committee members bustled into Hagrid's hut to read the dreadful sentence. In such moments, Harry discovered how patience can feel as dangerous as dagger play. Crash, Hagrid's milk jug. Shriek, Hermione finding Scabbers. Then the legal voices reading doom, now or never. Harry bowed to the hippogriff, untied the rope with shaking fingers, and together he and Hermione coaxed the great creature into the trees just as the axe fell upon nothing more than a fence post. Hagrid's howl of relief reached them like the cry of an enormous child. Dusk seeped across the grounds. From their hiding place, Harry and Hermione witnessed the night's grim pageant unfold like a play they already knew by heart, themselves sucked beneath the whomping willow, Lupin racing across the lawn, Snape stalking after, Hagrid singing his unsteady way to bed. Time, Harry realized, is a curious mirror. It shows the same face, even when you have turned away. As the moon slid free of cloud, Lupin's silhouette twisted into the dreadful lineaments of a werewolf. Far off, the events within the tunnel tumbled toward disaster exactly as before. Yet, here in the hush of the trees, Harry wrestled with an agony of inaction. "We mustn't be seen," Hermione reminded him, white-faced. "Dumbledore was clear." But another urgency soon pressed upon them. The distant lake glimmered menacingly, and Harry remembered the circle of Dementors, the dying cries, the silver miracle that had driven them off. If that miracle did not repeat itself, Sirius would perish, and so, perhaps, would Harry himself. Still clutching Buckbeak's rope, Hermione watched in horror as Harry slipped away toward the water's edge. Black shapes gathered round the lake, cloaks billowing like smoke. Harry crouched behind a bush. On the far shore, his past self struggled, his silver wisps of Patronus failing. The Dementors bent closer. No antlered saviour appeared across the water because the saviour had not yet acted. Realization struck him like cold lightning. I must be the rescuer. Expecto Patronum! Out of his wand thundered a Patronus solid and magnificent, a stag whose hooves skimmed the lake like moonbeams. It charged the Dementors. Darkness scattered and dissolved. The stag returned to the bank, bowed its glorious head, and in that shining visage Harry saw his father's nickname come alive once more, Prongs. Then light and stag alike vanished. Hermione, breathless, dragged Buckbeak to him. "You said you'd only watch." "I had to," he answered, still trembling. "I already had." Such is the strange grammar of time travel. Below, McNair hurried from the castle, doubtless to summon Dementors for a final unlawful feast. There was no time for further debate. Harry vaulted onto Buckbeak's back, Hermione clung behind, and the hippogriff leapt into the night. Castle walls slid past, windows gleamed like lantern slides. 13th from the right of the west tower. There. Hermione unlocked the casement with a whispered Alohomora. Sirius Black, gaunt as candle wax, squeezed out and mounted behind them. Upward they soared to the battlements where Sirius dismounted. His hand clasped Harry's shoulder with a strength born of gratitude rather than flesh. "You are your father's son," he murmured, voice rough with wonder. Then, with a nudge of his heels, he and Buckbeak wheeled into the silvered sky and were gone beyond the moonlit clouds. Far below, unseen gears of the great castle clock ground toward midnight. Harry and Hermione must still race back, unseen, to their beds, lest the tapestry of time snarl and tear. But for one exultant moment, they leaned upon the parapet and breathed deep the night air. Two innocents were free, one feathered, one human, and the stars above them seemed to dance for joy. Thus ends the secret chapter of a single evening. An hourglass turned thrice, a stag of living starlight, and the impossible kindness of reclaiming lost hope, deeds whose memory would, in days to come, hearten Harry when darker shadows yet would fall. It is one thing to bridle hippogriffs beneath a breathless sky. It is quite another to race a clock that knows the secret of every corridor. Harry and Hermione, hearts still thundering from their night's work, slipped back into the castle like children who have borrowed time itself and must now return it before anyone notices. 10 minutes, Hermione whispered, tapping her watch. If we are not in our beds before Dumbledore seals the ward— She left the sentence unfinished. Some perils need no describing. Down they scurried, shoes scuffing stone. Voices drifted from the foot of a winding stair. Harry pressed Hermione against the wall. Together they listened. Cornelius Fudge, sleek with self-congratulation, was promising the Daily Prophet a triumphant headline, while Severus Snape murmured oily agreements. Their words slid past like poisonous eels and were gone. Moments later, Peeves the poltergeist came capering along, shrieking with delight at the thought of Dementors and unfinished business. The two friends ducked into an empty classroom just as his cackle bounced off the ceiling. Time, an enemy once more, slipped through their fingers. 3 minutes, 2, 1. At the very stroke of near midnight, they reached the infirmary corridor. Dumbledore himself was emerging, wand raised to seal the lock. In the hush that followed, he seemed almost to have expected them. A smile, quiet as dawn, curved beneath his silver moustache. "Well?" he asked, as though requesting the smallest of favours. "Sirius is free," Harry breathed. "Buckbeak too. Excellent. In you go." The door shut, the lock clicked. They were safely returned to the hour from which they had strayed. Madame Pumphrey bustled out, thrust slabs of chocolate upon them, and scolded the headmaster's interference. But the lecture melted away when, far above, a roar of fury rattled the very rafters. Snape burst in a moment later, wild-eyed and spitting accusations. Even Fudge looked alarmed. Dumbledore, however, folded his hands and observed like a man listening to particularly beautiful music. With gentle logic, he proved the impossibility of Harry and Hermione's guilt, unless, of course, they could be in two places at once. Snape's rage blazed out and left him empty. He stalked away, robes snapping behind him like angry banners. The storm passed. Fudge fretted about headlines. Dementors were banished from the grounds, and the ward fell quiet, save for Ron's sleepy groan at the far end. Morning brought heat, freedom from exams, and the news of Professor Lupin's resignation. Harry found him alone in a half-packed office, the Marauders' map spread beneath his hands like an old love letter. The decision was already made. The outcry of parents, Lupin said gently, would be swift and undeniable. Yet his eyes warmed when Harry described the silver stag that had scattered 100 Dementors. "Your father's shape," he murmured. "Prongs rides again." He returned to Harry both cloak and map, gifts from one generation of mischief-makers to the next, and departed, suitcase in hand, leaving the room smelling faintly of wood smoke and chocolate. Dumbledore appeared in the doorway. His praise for the previous night's courage was sincere, yet Harry's heart felt oddly hollow. Pettigrew had escaped. The prophecy of Professor Trelawney, once so laughable, now trembled on the edge of truth. The headmaster's response was curious and comforting all at once. By sparing a life, Harry had woven a bond even Voldemort might one day rue. "You found your father inside yourself," Dumbledore finished, and his words glimmered like lantern light in a fog of uncertainties. The castle emptied toward Hogsmeade. Quidditch victories were toasted, yet Harry drifted beneath a private cloud. Hagrid, red-eyed with celebratory fatigue, announced Buckbeak's escape. Malfoy fumed. Percy lectured anyone in range about ministry reform, and somewhere beyond all maps, Sirius and his winged companion vanished into safe obscurity. Exam results arrived. Passes for all three friends, Nebraska, WTs for Percy, snarls and twitching fingers from Professor Snape. Gryffindor claimed the house cup amid scarlet banners and clattering goblets, but the joy of the feast could not quite chase Harry's thoughts from the empty place where a godfather's home might have been. Hogwarts slipped behind a green shoulder of mountain. The express rattled south. Hermione, pale but firm, announced she had returned her time-turner and would abandon the burden of Muggle studies. Ron invited Harry to the Burrow for the Quidditch World Cup, mangling the word telephone in the process. Their laughter thinned the air of the compartment. Then, bobbing outside the window, came a speck of grey fluff scarcely larger than a walnut. Harry hauled the minute owl to safety. It deposited an enormous envelope and whirled about the carriage in triumph. Hedwig clicked her beak in disapproval, Crookshanks inspected the newcomer, and Ron offered a tentative finger, which the owl nipped with gusto. The letter was from Sirius. It told of hidden places safer than Azkaban, confessed the gifting of a certain Firebolt, enclosed permission for Harry's future Hogsmeade visits, and offered the tiny owl as compensation for Ron's late-lamented rat. Warmth spilled through Harry like butterbeer on a winter evening. At King's Cross, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley embraced Harry. Uncle Vernon lingered at a safe distance, as though contagious cheer might leap the gap. Harry brandished the letter. "It's from my godfather," he announced brightly. "Escaped convict, you know, likes to keep in touch." Uncle Vernon's complexion drained to a doughy grey. For once he found no words. Harry steered his trolley toward the exit, Hedwig hooting softly, Sirius's letter crinkling in his pocket, and an unexpectedly promising summer opening before him like a door he had not known was there.